cultfiggatv. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. The New World Order is here. But Trump and the fascist US, the empire refused to go down without a fight. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Y'all. We got to get back to the global information. A lot going on. Trump is going to start a war in Venezuela to hide a lot of things. Let's get into that.
Venezuela flies military aircraft close to U.S. military ships in what the Pentagon calls a provocative move. And based off of comments and actions from the U.S. in the last few days, it looks like the U.S. is setting itself up to get beat down. They look like they are trying to start a war with a country that in reality they cannot win. And they're starting a war under false pretense. Now, these planes flying close to those military ships comes after the U.S. decided to extrajudiciously bomb a boat with 11 people after claiming that they were narco-terrorists taking drugs into the U.S., and they've yet to provide any proof to suggest that that is actually the truth. But to be clear, that boat full of 11 people could have been carrying all of the cocaine in Colombia, and the actions by the U.S. would have still been illegal. They just needed to seize the boat, investigate the boat, arrest and apprehend the traffickers, and then they would be dealt with accordingly to international law. But this is the U.S., so they shoot first, ask questions later, and then call everyone who dies a terrorist to justify their horrendous act. And they're using this, of course, to justify further provocation against Venezuela, as if this is more proof that Venezuela is involved in some elaborate trafficking scheme, and that has always been the case. And that's why they're allowed to engage in military action against Venezuela whenever they so please. But I got some news for you people. The Venezuelan government has a very long history of targeting traffickers, going after drug trafficking in a way that the United States should even be aware of, because they were one of their top allies until they weren't. And the reason why Venezuela and the US can no longer be allies in the fight against drug trafficking is because Hugo Chavez in Venezuela caught the DEA using its agency to support drug trafficking and carry out intelligence missions in Venezuela. Gasp! Color shot. But really, even since the 2000s to 2010s, Venezuela has dedicated its government resources to stopping drug trafficking, because they understand how much of a problem it is, not only for the international community, but for its own community as well. And yet Trump seems to ignore this. And while Trump is ignoring the efforts that Venezuela has consistently put in to tackle trafficking, they are simultaneously working with the president of Ecuador, claiming that he is going to help tackle trafficking. And Maduro called out the clear hypocrisy here. Oh, y'all didn't know? Yeah, Ecuador is responsible for producing like 60% of the cocaine traffic directly from Ecuador to Colombia and then into the United States. But worse than that, the company in which Noboa's family owns is basically the plug of plugs for Latin America and Europe. In the 2000s, several international seizures of cocaine hidden in containers of bananas exported from Ecuador were traced back to shipments involving the boiling companies. In the 2010s, European police, especially in Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium, intercepted multiple Noboa banana shipments containing cocaine. And although Noboa's dad was never formally convicted, everybody knew that the cartels were using his containment and shipping companies as their export networks. But that's the guy Marco Rubio says is going to help defeat drug trafficking that Venezuela is allegedly participating in. So if the United States decides to go to war with Venezuela, it would literally be because they're lying to you and they just want the oil. It has nothing to do with drug trafficking. But of course, beyond that, it's a war they can't possibly. You see, ladies and gentlemen, in 2022, military applicants reached a 40-year low. People just don't seem to be that patriotic anymore. I can't imagine why. I guess fighting forever wars all the time and seeing your friends and family die for no reason while killing innocent people will have that effect on your military and your patriotism. Meanwhile, Maduro makes a phone call and calls up 4.5 million militia. This isn't the 250 plus thousand active duty he has. This is just people who are trained to fight like them. And y'all think we can win? It wasn't that long ago that a special forces outfit tried to conduct a military operation in Venezuela and got their asses handed to them immediately. Why do you think the United States is out here blowing up fishermen boats instead of attacking military installations in Venezuela? Why do you think that they have to try to rig the elections instead of overthrowing the government directly like they've tried to do or have done successfully in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, in other places where they were sure that they could win with their military might? It's because despite all the chest beating that you're seeing on TV and social media, they know what I know. If they could invade and they knew they could win, they would do so. But they can't. So they're going to continue floating around in circles and attacking fishermen boats because the moment they actually attack a Venezuelan military installation, it's over for their ass. So think about that the next time you want to push regime change in Venezuela over all pretext of junk.
When a nation accustomed to being the unchallenged leader, the United States, suddenly finds itself confronted not just by one rival, but by an entire global shift in power. That's exactly what we're witnessing in this latest warning from China to the United States regarding Venezuela. This isn't just about Venezuela. This is about the world changing before our very eyes. Let us begin with this first and most striking development: China pushing back against the United States in Venezuela. This is not a minor event nor a diplomatic footnote. It is a moment loaded with symbolism and consequence. For decades, Washington has grown used to operating in Latin America without any serious challenge. The script was always the same. If a government in the region resisted US influence, sanctions were imposed, destabilization followed, and sometimes even military interventions were carried out directly or by proxy. It was an established rhythm of empire. But now, when Washington moves to corner Venezuela economically and politically, Beijing steps forward and says, in no uncertain terms, this will not go unchallenged. That alone marks a profound departure from the past. Why does this matter? Because what China is doing is not merely offering friendly support to Venezuela. It is asserting itself in a region long declared off limits by US power. It is like walking into another man's house and setting a chair at the dining table uninvited. That's how Washington sees it: an intrusion, a challenge, and ultimately a test of its ability to enforce the so-called rules of the game it wrote nearly 2 centuries ago. And here's the hook for all of us: when the United States is forced to face a rival in its own backyard, It reveals that the world order we took for granted is cracking before our eyes. Consider what China has actually done in Venezuela. Beyond public statements, Beijing has invested billions in oil projects, infrastructure, and social programs that directly tie Venezuela's stability to China's economy. This is not soft diplomacy, it's hard power through economic integration. Every dollar China lends, every oil shipment secured, deepens Venezuela's reliance on Beijing and reduces Washington's leverage.
I'm rolling up this good dinner. I see y'all popping up in here talking about the U.S. will demolish Venezuela. Okay, I want y'all to stay tuned because I'm going to keep running information on that. The U.S. lost to the Taliban. To y'all who keep popping up in here telling us how strong we are. The U.S. lost to the motherfucking Taliban. They barely have on sandals. And sometimes they have to pass rifles to one another. Stop telling me about what goes on in the movies. Your government has ripped you off. Your military gets their ass whooped everywhere they stop. The U.S. is going to demolish Venezuela. U.S. will blow Venezuela. Man, please, if y'all just sit down and learn something, I want to do this. But I need y'all to get, when y'all follow here, learn something. Don't tell it me. It's hard. It's some brave brothers and sisters in the U.S. military. But the fact is, they got ran out of Afghanistan to the Taliban. They don't have tanks, planes, and shit like that. Come on, bro. When you come to House of Revolution, you here to learn. You understand that? Don't tell me about a fucking military who ain't won a war in 50 years. Stop. Please.
So when U.S. policymakers talk about isolating Venezuela, the reality is very different. You cannot isolate a country when the second largest economy on earth has opened its arms to it. That is the contradiction now confronting U.S. strategy. Now think about the timing. China is not issuing this warning in a vacuum. The global system is already strained by trade wars, shifting alliances, and the erosion of U.S. credibility after years of endless wars and financial crises. Beijing senses weakness. It knows that Washington is overstretched, both militarily and politically, trying to police Europe, Asia, and the Middle East all at once. By asserting itself in Venezuela, China is not only supporting a partner, it is probing the limits of U.S. capacity. How far can Washington go before it admits it can no longer dominate everywhere all at once? That is the uncomfortable question now on the table, but the hook that should keep you thinking is this: China is playing a long game, and the United States is trapped in a short-term mindset. Washington uses sanctions and threats, tools designed to punish immediately. Beijing uses loans, infrastructure, and oil deals, tools designed to pay off over decades. Which strategy do you think builds lasting influence? Which strategy do you think Venezuelans facing sanctions that strangle their economy will prefer? The one that offers lifelines or the one that offers punishment? This is not about ideology, it's about practicality, and Beijing is proving far more pragmatic than Washington. We should also recognize that China's warning to the United States is more than words. It's a declaration of presence.
You know how many people used to come? Russia war started with NATO and Ukraine. And I gotta just say this. You know how many people used to come in here and tell me how wrong I was about how Russia was finna be humiliated and the U.S. would just devastate and NATO would just devastate Russia? That's what they used to say. We don't never see none of those people no more. Never. But it's on to the next one. So I guess it's going to be Venezuela is finished until you get a reality of what you're finna witness. Now, I give Edward Snowden told us it's about forever wars, you know. So basically, they don't give a shit about winning the war. They don't care about getting people killed. That means nothing. But the fact of the matter is, they will never, ever, ever. I've been you talking about just defeat a military? That's that's over with. You can't pick nobody no more because everybody can defend themselves. Those days are over with. The U.S. If somebody tried to invade the U.S. would defeat them. You're not gonna just come here. We'll fight like hell. But them going somewhere, going anywhere, and defeating the people. Yes, if it was the 1600s, you can kill everybody in sight, but you can't do that no more. You got to put boots on the ground. The U.S. can't put boots on the ground nowhere and get in the trenches and out there. Oh, and I told people why, because everybody want to be home for Christmas. You want to come see your kids. Man, you trying to pick on people, and people don't give a fuck. It ain't no tomorrow if they don't defeat you. So what happened to Ukraine was a lesson to the world that the NATO and the U.S. empire was finished. Why the fuck you think Trump is picking Venezuela? They want something easy. It's not too many choices. They was going to fight Iran until those supersonic missiles start landing everywhere in fucking Israel. Man, you better pay attention to what the fuck going on and be ready to defend yourself. You better learn how to defend yourself. Quit motherfucking thinking that your oppressor is going to beat somebody on behalf of you. That's fucking ridiculous. We need peace around the globe because these people can't protect us from nobody. They stole all your money and told you they had the best.
Says we are here in your hemisphere and we are not leaving. That resonates far beyond Venezuela. It signals to every Latin American nation that there is now a genuine alternative to U.S. dominance. If you are Brazil, Argentina, or even small Caribbean nations, you suddenly see the possibility of balancing Washington with Beijing, playing one off the other, and securing better terms for yourself. That shift in perception is just as powerful as the actual investments.
All those advanced weapons China put on display the other day, they don't want that dragon smoke, man. At least be mind our business. There's plenty of money to make. That's what China's saying. Let's just make money. Putin telling Trump, let's just make money. Don't do this. You're going to make a terrible mistake. But they got Trump right where they want him in them Epstein files. I've been paying attention to the Epstein hearings. A lot of Trump, Epstein, you look at the news, that's why he got to do this shit. You see, humiliation is a motherfucker. That man he don't want all that information to flood. And the small hats is telling him, you keep this chaos going on all around the world. And we might not expose your ass and how you want to jump off the top floor of the White House. This is a very dangerous time we're in right now, man. Because he's compromised and he got to go to war. They want more war. They want less people on this fucking planet.
Because it undermines the aura of inevitability that U.S. power once held. And let's not forget the audience within the United States itself. When China warns Washington on Venezuela, it forces American citizens, though often indirectly, to confront an unsettling reality. The nation that once set the rules for the entire globe is now being told to back off, and there is little it can do to enforce its will without consequences. That breeds insecurity, anxiety, and political debate inside the U.S., which is precisely what rivals like China hope to provoke. The more Washington hesitates, the more its aura of control erodes. So here's where the real drama lies. This is not just a diplomatic spat over one Latin American country. It is a flashing signal that the global balance of power is shifting, and that shift is being felt in places the U.S. once assumed were permanently under its command. The world is not waiting for Washington to adjust.
Venezuela, wow, they're going to 52 fake, and then they're going to go into Haiti real quick and see Haiti, watch, go kill. They just put the money on barbecue head. What they did, was it $5 million or something? Bunch of money they put on barbecue. They're going to go to Haiti because they got to seize the resources and keep those people in poverty, like Hillary Clinton said, keep them working for cheap over there. They just sent 6 or 7 advanced warplanes. I think it was to Puerto Rico or one of those Caribbean nations to fight. 6 advanced fighter planes, they say, to fight drug trafficking. That's what's so disgusting about this. Trump that humiliated himself before. This is like saying weapons of mass destruction, bro. And everybody laughed at Bush. We got to laugh at you. You ain't fighting no drug traffickers, bro. Just like Saddam had no weapons of mass destruction. It's crazy, bro. But we living, it's back to the motherfucker, the past. You know, it's Groundhog Day. Once again, we living in the president's bullshit, pull us in the war, A lot of people gonna die. They gonna make a bunch of motherfucking money, bro, off of this shit. And it's gonna be bad news for the U.S.
It is moving on, and China's warning over Venezuela is one more reminder that a multipolar order is no longer coming. It is already here. When we turn to the weakening of U.S.
Venezuela
influence,
just flew their planes over U.S. warships. They're like, nigga, we got planes too, and we got F-400. They got weapons, real weapons that the Taliban didn't have, that Iraq didn't have, that Libya didn't have, that Syria didn't have, that none of these fucking countries they bombing, they don't have none of this shit. U.S. have not fought a nation that got fighter planes and tanks and ground forces and navies. They ain't done that shit since World War II. This ain't no game. This is serious business, playing with the Americans' lives that's in the military, because our government is fucking corrupt. And people come in my audience, Venezuela gonna get blown off the map. The U.S. is gonna, what the, man, please. Where the fuck you think you at? Who told you that lie? You like that bully mentality. Nah, that shit
in its so-called backyard, the significance cannot be overstated.
I'm calling it right
for
here.
nearly two
nobody
centuries.
Else you hear it for co-figure, like I call the Ukraine shit, and everybody know it. Well, nobody else, no black people would tell the truth, talk about the Nazis in Ukraine. I'm the first person to bring that to this internet that was black. Me. Told the truth. Lost channels behind that shit, but I'm still standing on business. So I'm gonna tell the truth right here. Let these people attack Venezuela and watch the ass whooping that come with it. You can't use nukes, but just prove that Russia. Oh, you got to put your boots on the ground. Nigga, they just called up 4 million motherfucking fighters. The fuck is the U.S. sent 4,000? Man, stop.
The Monroe Doctrine was waved like a flag, a declaration that Latin America was under Washington's watchful eye and protective hand. But protection is never the right word. What it meant in reality was control, political, economic, and often military. From coups orchestrated in Guatemala and Chile to interventions in Grenada and Panama, the message was consistent. Any government in the region that challenged U.S. dominance would pay the price. This long history shaped expectations in Washington that Latin America would always bend, always yield. And yet, today, we see something new cracks in that dominance. Cracks deepened not by internal rebellion alone, but by the presence of another great power, China. The evidence of weakening control is everywhere. Take Venezuela. In earlier decades, a government leaning away from U.S. interests might have been swiftly destabilized, its leaders removed, its economic structure shattered, and forced back into alignment. But the repeated efforts against Venezuela, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, recognition of alternative governments, have not produced the outcome Washington expected. Why? Because Venezuela is not standing alone. With China and to some extent Russia standing behind it, Venezuela has been able to withstand blows that would have toppled regimes in the past. This tells us something crucial. U.S. dominance in Latin America is no longer unquestioned, and that is a historic shift. And here is the hook. When an empire begins to lose its grip on its backyard, the world takes notice. If Washington cannot impose its will in Caracas, how will it project power in more distant corners of the globe? If the U.S. cannot enforce obedience in the very region it once claimed as its private domain, what does that say about its ability to dictate terms in Asia, Africa, or the Middle East? Weakness in the backyard becomes a signal of weakness everywhere. Rivals sense it, allies notice it, and people within Latin America begin to realize they have options. That realization may prove more destabilizing for Washington than any single policy dispute. China has played this moment skillfully. It does not need to issue endless military threats or interventions. It simply offers what the U.S. has so often failed to provide: investment without direct interference, loans for infrastructure, partnerships for energy, trade deals that bypass US sanctions. These are not just transactions, they are symbols of independence from Washington's grip. And while these relationships are not free from strings, they create a psychological shift. Leaders in Latin America now know they can bargain. They can walk into a negotiation with Washington and, for the first time in generations, point to an alternative partner waiting across the Pacific. That leverage transforms politics across the continent. Let us be clear, this is not just about Venezuela. Look at Brazil, where China is already the largest trading partner. Look at Argentina, where Chinese investment plays a growing role in energy and infrastructure.
Now,
look at smaller states.
Those advanced weapons China just horrified NATO with the other day. Where do you think a lot of those weapons is at? Those drones that is terrifying Ukraine. Iran just told these people those drones is in Venezuela. These people making a terrible mistake. Russia already told the U.S. the S-400 and the S-300 is in Venezuela. There would be no planes flying over Venezuela unless they B-2 bombers way in the sky. I mean, this mistake that Trump is making because the people got him right where they want him. It's just gonna sink the U.S. empire faster. It's biblical. It was written, but damn, it's shocking to me that they actually gonna do it.
States across Central America and the Caribbean signing on to Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. Each new agreement chips away at the presumption of U.S. dominance. Each deal signals that the backyard is no longer fenced off for one power alone. This erosion does not happen overnight, but slowly, steadily, until one day the balance of power has shifted and the old order cannot be restored. And here's another hook that cuts deeper. The United States is discovering the limits of military power in a region where economic power now speaks louder.
Europe, all these people is finished. Europe is finished. They going back to the Stone Ages. No more roaching off Africa. Putin helped put an end to that. They no more energy security. That's over. And China and Russia is trying to give the U.S. an opportunity not to go down with Europe, but these Europeans in America and the small hats is trying to force those in America who want to think about America first. They're like, fuck no. They're trying to tie themselves to old Europe. That's a fact. So they just know they're going to go down with them, but it puts us in a fucked up position because China and Russia absolutely want to do big business with the U.S., not with the imperialists. But you got a problem. You got to get rid of imperialists. You got to get rid of small hats who see
troops, staging interventions. These were the methods of the 20th century. But today, sanctions and military threats meet the counterweight of Chinese investment and trade. Bombs cannot rebuild economies, but railways, ports, and oil contracts can. And so Latin America begins to look not toward the stick of U.S. punishment, but toward the carrot of Chinese opportunity. This is how influence is lost, not with one dramatic collapse, but with the slow recognition that another partner offers more tangible benefits than the old hegemon. For the American elite, this is an existential problem. The backyard was supposed to be secure, a foundation upon which global power rested. If that foundation erodes, the entire structure wobbles. For ordinary Americans, the costs are different, but no less real. Endless spending to prop up influence abroad, higher risks of confrontation with rising powers, and the unsettling realization that the U.S. is no longer the uncontested leader of the hemisphere. For Latin America, however, this shift offers a new kind of hope, the possibility of escaping a century-old cycle of dependency by playing powers against one another to their own advantage. The bottom line is this: when the United States can no longer enforce its will in Latin America, the myth of uncontested U.S. hegemony dissolves. The backyard is slipping away, and with it, the illusion that Washington still calls every shot. That is the exposed truth behind China's growing role, and it is one the U.S. can neither easily reverse nor comfortably accept. When U.S. officials speak about Venezuela, the language is always dressed in noble terms, defending democracy, restoring human rights, or protecting the Venezuelan people. These phrases are repeated across press conferences, headlines, and speeches, giving the impression that Washington's motives are purely moral. But if we strip away the rhetoric and examine the reality, a very different picture emerges. At the heart of this struggle is not democracy, it is economics, it is not about principles, it is about oil, energy security, and influence in the global system. This is the truth often hidden from public view, yet it explains more clearly than anything else why the United States and China are clashing over Venezuela. Let's be direct. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world, not Saudi Arabia, not Russia, not the United States, Venezuela. In a century still fueled.
They never say that on the news. When they talking about fighting drugs, they never say Venezuela have the #1 proven oil reserves on the planet. Because if they ever said that, everybody watching would know what this is all about. If they told the world they supposed to be richer than the Arabs, and they'll tell you, oh, it's because socialism. It's because socialism and communism. Full of shit. When they say this shit, you should point to China. Anytime they say socialism has wrecked these countries, you point to China. You say, why is China one of the richest countries in the world? They more advanced than the rest of the people. They'll go to another subject because that is a myth. They're sanctioning these people and starving people out so you won't look to their systems of governance to think that they're better than what the U.S. have. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not. But I hate when they lie on TV and say the Venezuelan people are poor because the leader is socialist and communist, and it's just bullshit. Because China is a communist nation and is making the U.S. look like fools every goddamn day. Come on now. They lost the battle.
By oil.
They lost the battle to communism when we look at China. That's just a fact. They should move on and say have another argument because you lost that communist versus capitalist battle, and that's just a fact.
Control over that resource means leverage, power, and wealth. That's why Washington has been so relentless in its pressure. Imagine for a moment if Venezuela's primary export were bananas or coffee. Would there be this much urgency? Would sanctions cripple an entire nation's economy? Of course not. What makes Venezuela a constant target is the strategic importance of its resources. Oil is the beating heart of this conflict. And here's the hook whenever you hear politicians invoking democracy in Venezuela, remember that behind the speeches lies the crude reality of crude oil. Consider the pattern. In 2019, when Washington recognized an unelected opposition leader as the legitimate president of Venezuela, the justification given was democracy. But the effect was control of oil revenues, redirecting assets to figures more aligned with U.S. interests. Sanctions, too, were justified as a way to pressure the government to hold fair elections. Yet sanctions disproportionately crippled Venezuela's oil sector, cutting off revenues and deepening the country's economic collapse. If the mission were purely democratic, why target the very industry that sustains the population? The answer is clear. Weakening Venezuela's ability to control its own oil means increasing the leverage of those who want to reshape its politics. China sees this dynamic and plays a different hand.
Now,
Beijing.
No, what he just said should piss every American off that had to deal with the Venezuelan migrant influx to America. You see what they did? They caused the problem. Then the people come here. Then they have the migrant scam, which they use against us. So they win it all the way over the board. They're going to try to go jack that oil. They done already harmed our communities. A lot of crimes been getting committed. A lot of people being killed. Migrants is killing people. Look, migrants just killed this black girl that's all over the news. These migrants killing people. They taking over apartment complexes. Remember, that's the Venezuelan gangs that was doing this shit. Then on the news, they get to say, well, see, the socialist Nicolas Maduro is ruining the country and forcing all the Venezuelans into our country. And then people like, man, we got to do something. And some people don't have a cult figure TV to listen to and get the information. So they just thinking, damn, all these people over here because Venezuela, if you go fix Venezuela, all the migrants will stop coming. You fix Venezuela by stop sanctioning them so people can live over there with the great resources and they won't have to leave the country. This is a scam, and it has harmed Americans. The government officials should be arrested for what they did to the fucking Americans. That's a fact, bro. They should be arrested for that.
Beijing does not ask Venezuela to transform its government system. Instead, it signs long-term oil contracts, offers loans secured by energy exports, and builds infrastructure around those deals. This approach is not rooted in altruism. It is strategic self-interest. China needs reliable energy supplies to fuel its enormous economy, and Venezuela offers a source less tied to the volatile politics of the Middle East or the rivalries of Russia. So while Washington frames its actions in the language of morality, Beijing frames its moves in the language of mutual benefit. And here's the point: in a world where nations seek partners who respect sovereignty, even superficially, the Chinese approach looks far more appealing than Washington's sanctions first model. The competition over Venezuela then becomes a contest of narratives as well as interests. Washington sells the story of democracy, but beneath it lies the pursuit of oil. Beijing sells the story of partnership, but beneath it lies the hunger for energy security. Both are pursuing power, but one cloaks it in moral rhetoric, while the other cloaks it in economic pragmatism. For the people of Venezuela, this is a double-edged sword. On one side, suffocating sanctions and the risk of political destabilization. On the other, heavy dependence on a foreign power whose long-term goals may not align with local development. Yet between the two, it is clear why many Venezuelans see China as a lifeline rather than a hammer. And here is a sharper hook. This struggle in Venezuela is not an isolated case. It is a template. Wherever resources are abundant and governments resist U.S. influence, Washington frames intervention in terms of democracy, while China steps in with investment. Think of Africa, where similar patterns play out over minerals. Think of the Middle East, where oil has long driven U.S. policy. Venezuela is simply the most visible stage right now because it sits in America's hemisphere, where the old rules said no outside power was allowed to interfere. But those rules are no longer enforceable, and the mask of democracy is slipping. For ordinary Americans, the tragedy is that this reality is hidden behind patriotic slogans. They are told that interventions are noble, that sanctions defend freedom, when in fact these policies serve the interests of corporations, investors, and geopolitical strategists. They pay the cost through higher fuel prices, tax dollars poured into foreign maneuvers, and the global instability that follows. For Venezuelans, the price is even higher: years of economic strangulation, shortages, and political polarization, all in the name of a democracy that is secondary to oil. So when we ask what is really at stake in Venezuela, let us not be distracted by the language of morality. Let us recognize what history has shown us repeatedly, that empires rarely intervene for principles, but almost always for resources. And as long as Venezuela sits atop the largest oil reserves in the world, the struggle for its future will be less about ballots and more about barrels. When China steps forward and issues a warning to the United States over Venezuela, what it really exposes is not only a tactical disagreement, not only a clash of interests, but a deeper truth about the trajectory of empires. Every empire in history believed itself permanent. The Romans believed it. The British believed it. And in the last century, the United States believed it as well, that its dominance was unquestionable, that it could extend indefinitely across continents, that the world would bend to its rules without serious resistance. Yet history reminds us of a sobering reality: no empire escapes decline. The warning from China is not just about Venezuela, it is a symbol, a flashing light of a larger decline in American power. To understand why this matters, think about the symbolism of Venezuela itself. Here is a nation in the Western Hemisphere, a region the United States claimed as its own sphere of influence since the 1820s. For nearly 200 years, the idea that Latin America was off limits to rival powers.
The only difference between the U.S. empire and all the other empires that done fell in history is that the U.S. is the first empire with nuclear weapons. And you can say that the Soviet Union was an empire, but then you had the Russians standing there in the wing waiting to get the nuclear weapons and then continue on the legacy of the Russian people. The United States, that's a different story. So this is the first time in history a real empire that's attacking the world and wants complete dominance is being stopped in its tracks. So the fall of the U.S., we don't know exactly how this is going to go because these maniacs that's run by the Zionists, they have nuclear weapons. So this is very dangerous. That's another reason why Putin for sure has tried to do this gracefully, because he understands you're dealing with a rabid dog of China too. They're not dumb. They're trying to do this gracefully, but you ain't no grace with these killers.
Was unquestioned. That was the Monroe Doctrine in practice. For Washington, being able to dictate terms in its own hemisphere was the foundation of its global power. If the U.S. could not dominate nearby nations, how could it claim to lead the world? But now, for the first time in modern history, another great power, China, is not only present in that hemisphere, but directly challenging Washington's authority. That marks the crossing of a threshold, a moment when the myth of unshakable U.S. dominance is pierced. Here is the hook. Decline rarely announces itself in dramatic collapses. It begins with moments like this, where the old rules no longer hold, where once the United States said, "This is our backyard," now another power says, "We are here too." Where once U.S. sanctions could crush an economy, now alternative partners make survival possible. Decline is visible in the cracks, in the erosion of fear, in the growing confidence of rivals who see opportunity where once they saw only risk. Consider the reaction across the globe. Nations in Africa, Asia, and even Europe are watching how this unfolds. If Washington cannot assert dominance in Venezuela, then perhaps it cannot dictate terms elsewhere either. If China can establish itself in Caracas despite U.S. resistance, perhaps it can expand its influence in other places long considered safe for U.S. power. In this sense, Venezuela becomes a test case, a microcosm of the larger contest between a fading hegemon and a rival.
How many people you willing to lose? Is how many? Russia done lost hundreds of thousands of people in this current war with Ukraine. Ukrainians done lost over 1 million. Come on, man. The U.S. has never lost hundreds of thousands of people in the war. They only lost 50,000 in the Vietnam War. 1 million. You ready to lose 1 million people? It's about your pain tolerance. They don't have that type of tolerance. And weapons are too advanced, so they just don't have that superiority no more, where they can just bully these nations like they did to Iraq or Libya. That's not gonna happen with Venezuela. They couldn't do it with Iran, and Venezuela is more powerful than Iran. BRICS just held an emergency meeting. At the same time, they just called for joint naval exercises off the coast of South Africa. Venezuela, they are preparing themselves to take on NATO. Venezuela is a part of BRICS. And I can tell the people, anytime they do the naval operations, that's Russia teaching these armies how to operate in a warfare. Russia teaches these armies how to, the Soviet Union used to do it, but now it's Russia teaching these armies to prepare for these wars.
Rising challenger. Every outcome there signals something bigger about the state of global power. And let's not miss how this looks inside the United States itself. Political leaders continue to tell their citizens that America remains the indispensable nation, the unchallenged superpower. Yet the evidence tells another story: endless wars that drained resources without victory, financial crises that shook faith in the U.S. economic model, rising inequality at home that undermines the very legitimacy of its political system. And now, rivals like China pressing into areas once considered untouchable. These are not isolated problems. They are signs of an empire struggling to maintain what it once took for granted. Another hook lies in the psychology of power. The strength of an empire is not only in its armies or its wealth, but in the belief by others and by itself that it cannot be challenged. Once that aura begins to fade, decline accelerates. China's warning strips away that aura. It demonstrates that Washington can be defied even in its own hemisphere, and that defiance can succeed. For Latin America, this realization is powerful. For decades, nations lived under the assumption that Washington's approval was necessary for stability. But if Venezuela, battered and sanctioned, can find protection in China's embrace, then others may begin to calculate differently. And those calculations, multiplied across the region, steadily erode U.S. hegemony. Let's frame it another way. The United States is learning what the British once learned. At their peak, the British Empire ruled vast colonies, commanded the seas, and dictated the global economy. But once rivals emerged, Germany, the United States itself, and later others, the empire could no longer impose its will without cost. Decline did not happen in a single year. It was a slow, grinding process of adjusting to a multipolar world. That is precisely what the U.S. faces today. The rise of China is not a temporary disturbance. It is the structural reality of a shifting global order. And Venezuela is one of the places where this shift becomes visible in stark relief. For ordinary people, the stakes are not abstract. Declining dominance means a future where the U.S. cannot simply command outcomes through sanctions or interventions. It means higher risks of conflict as Washington resists acknowledging its decline. It means resources diverted from domestic needs into desperate attempts to preserve influence abroad. And it means the world itself faces uncertainty as the balance of power reshuffles in ways not seen since the end of World War II. So when China warns the U.S. on Venezuela, it is more than a diplomatic message. It is a reminder that the world is changing, that the American century is giving way to something new, and that no amount of rhetoric can mask the structural decline of empire. That is the exposed truth. The question is whether the United States will recognize it in time, or whether, like so many empires before it, it will cling to illusions until reality forces a reckoning.
We need to wake the hell up right now. I mean, seriously, get our heads out of the sand. The New World Order is being rewritten in real time. President Putin, Xi Jinping this week in China, basically rebuilding the New World Order with the United States being pushed to the side, outcast. Even Trump called it out this week. He said Russia, China, India are conspiring against the United States, he said. And he's right. They are conspiring, not in an evil and nefarious way, but we are being pushed out. And some very smart people are sounding the alarm about what's coming, like Pavel Durov, the billionaire founder of Telegram, who just posted this, quote, both world wars started from a Western European country's attack on a Slavic country. Austria's invasion of Serbia in 1914, Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. In the 19th century, the West invaded the Slavic lands unprovoked during the Napoleonic Wars and the Crimean War. So he's not reciting trivia here. He's flashing a warning light right now because once again, Western Europe and the United States are jockeying for influence in the Balkans and in Poland. President Trump this week going all in on Poland. NATO and the U.S. pouring money, arms, and propaganda into fragile states like Serbia and Bosnia. And I can only wonder, are they ready to explain to their citizens how it ended the last times we meddled in the Balkans with 2 world wars? And I'll tell you something from my own time in Serbia. When I visited recently, people there talk openly about the pain, the suffering brought by NATO. They haven't forgotten the 78 days of bombing ordered by Bill Clinton and NATO back in 1999. They remember huddling in their basements as NATO jets bombarded Belgrade and other parts of the country. Bill Clinton bombed the Chinese embassy on purpose, trying to send a clear message. This is our country to exert power over, not yours. And here in 2025, throughout Serbia, you can still see the bombed out buildings that stand as scars of that attack. It's a living memory for them, for the people I spoke to in Belgrade. They remember NATO's vicious attacks.
Did your family talk about what happened in the late 90s here?
Yes.
Yeah.
My dad was there in the war, and that's awful thing. So we're not so.
It's very
We can't,
stressful for people here to talk too much about that.
Yeah, they carry that trauma. And they view NATO not as liberators, but as the people who rained fire down on their families, destroyed their country. And here's the truth. The Balkans right now are a powder keg. Everyone's eyes are locked on Ukraine and Taiwan. But the real story is here. This week, I spoke to a journalist in Serbia who said, Clayton, people don't understand what's coming. Putin wants ports all up and down the Adriatic and Aegean Sea to secure Russia's southern flank. Putin would love nothing more than ports all along this area. China, meanwhile, expanding its Belt and Road projects through the Balkans to reach deeper into Europe. Their oil and natural gas interests are off the charts, important for China. Turkey is angling for influence from Bosnia to the Greek islands, while the fight over offshore drilling rights near Greece is intensifying right now. And of course, America. They're trying to destabilize Serbia, tighten NATO's grip. Recently, NATO expanded its presence in Kosovo, a territory that Serbia doesn't recognize as its own country, but in fact part of its country. NATO built a massive base there called Camp Bondsteel, right in their backyard. So this region is about to explode. If you pull up a map, you'll see it clear as day. Russia, China, Turkey, and the United States all converging right here, right on Italy's back doorstep, treating the Balkans like the chessboard of empires right now. Serbia is getting pissed. They've drawn closer to Hungary in recent months, which is a NATO and EU pariah state. They hate Viktor Orban. They hate Hungary.
Those who love conspiracy theories are in trouble. They have to find new ones because the old one proved to be true.
Bosnian leaders want to break apart that country and aligning it with Serbia, bring it all together as part of a united Serbia, which Putin absolutely supports. NATO does not, FYI. And it's no accident that Russia's Wagner Group is operating heavily in northern Africa right now, because from Libya to the Balkans, these corridors of influence all connect. So when Durov warns us over the past few days that history is repeating itself right now, he's not exaggerating. The Balkans were the spark before, and they're shaping up to be the spark again. As former Croatian president just said, the Balkans can quickly descend into bloodshed. This is a powder keg waiting to explode.
Is the Balkan powder keg likely to explode again?
I personally and a lot of us have been saying for a number of years now. However, the second-rate potential is to descend into turmoil and bloodshed very quickly.
And here's the part that stuns me. While NATO and the EU are busy lighting matches in a tinderbox right now, the real story of last week just unfolded in plain sight. And the United States media, mainstream media, barely even touched it. I mean, we covered it here on the show, but the mainstream media didn't even acknowledge it. Putin, Xi, Modi essentially laid out the new world order at the Shanghai Cooperative Organization Summit in China. That was the single biggest story of the week. And if you missed it, it's because corporate media wants you distracted. What we saw at this summit was nothing short of a total rearranging of the world order. Putin stood side by side with Xi Jinping, with Modi, projecting unbreakable unity. They weren't just smiling for the cameras. They were declaring the end of a unipolar dominance of America. Together, they represent half the world's population, trillions in GDP, and the lion's share of the world's energy and resources. And they're building their own financial and military architecture to shield against United States sanctions and endless regime change wars. Here are just a few of the highlights. Xi unveiled a global governance initiative, a new SEO development bank. Instead of relying on the IMF, they announced new partnerships in energy, technology, infrastructure. They even announced access to China's Beidou satellite systems, which is an alternative to GPS satellite systems. Putin pledged resilience against sanctions. Modi asserted India's independence. This was a declaration that multipolar order is here, multi-nations with their own sovereignty. Right now, and the United States, it's losing its grip on its unipolar plan, which is the United States controls everything. Sorry. Meanwhile, the United States keeps overreaching. Washington thought it could just box Russia out of Europe, but actually Putin just turned his back on Europe for good on his own, sealing the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline deal with China. We covered this on the show this week. That pipeline is a $100 billion geopolitical divorce from Europe, shifting Russia's energy eastward to China.
They don't want the world to know.
And Europe, they're now permanently cut off. Washington thought it could keep India in its camp, but Trump's moves to block India's rise as a great power, pressuring them on trade, undermining partnerships, only pushed Delhi closer to Moscow and Beijing, strengthening the BRICS alliance. The very strategy meant to...
A lot of Europeans is going to die in the winter behind this. That's serious business. They don't have the heat to heat their homes during the winter. Russia has officially cut them off for good. You see, they was buying higher oil and gas, higher gas and stuff from India, which was getting it from Russia. They knew about this, but Trump needed somebody to play tough with. So he attacked India with more sanctions, talking about they was buying the oil and gas from Russia, which is legal. But Trump needed somebody to play tough with. China's buying more, but he can't play tough with China because they tried that before, and China sanctioned their ass and cut their ass off from rare earth minerals. So he been through that headache before. India didn't have that type of power. But a lot of Europeans is going to die because they no longer get this energy. That's serious. And the U.S. can't replace all of that Russian gas that they needed to heat their homes. But the small hats, they don't give a damn. They want people to die.
To contain China actually strengthened the China-Russia-India axis. And this week, Putin issued his starkest warning yet. He told NATO directly, if Western boots step foot in Ukraine, it won't stay a regional fight. We will kill NATO soldiers.
Втягивание Украины в НАТО. Поэтому если там будут появляться какие-то войска, особенно сейчас, в ходе ведения боевых действий.
End of story, he said. And he pitched what he called a real peace through security guarantee, but nobody in Washington or Brussels wants to hear it. They want an endless war with Ukraine. And of course, now peace is falling apart in Ukraine once again. More land advancements from Russia, more dead in Ukraine. Putin just launched a devastating strike this past.
Revolution to our brother Larry McDaniel for the donation to the war chest. Revolution is a way of life. Absolutely appreciate the love, family. Say salute to King Y. Stand tall and stand on business. Salute to you, family, for helping me keep the lights on here at the House of Revolution. Revolution is a way of life. Salute, soldier. I appreciate the love.
Past week. Estimates we heard this week have now Ukrainian dead soldiers nearing 1.8 million. At the same time, Washington is preparing yet for another reckless adventure, plotting to overthrow Venezuela's government. Warships repositioning.
Fighting against the Russians, Come on, man. The U.S. can't take that. But if you go into Ukraine, your ass better be ready. You better be ready. And that's light work. That's not even, it's not a war. It's a special military operation. Now, the U.S. laughs at that, but Putin is saying he'd already warned them. If NATO goes to Ukraine, he's going to take the gloves off. He's going to make it look like Gaza. He said that. He's not trying to do that to his Slavic brothers. He's just trying to get rid of them Nazis and disarm, so they don't have a military in Ukraine and kill the Nazis. That's a fact. But he warned them like he did the other day. If NATO goes into Ukraine, everything getting level. They ain't never seen devastation like that. They, like I say, once again, I hate to just keep telling y'all that they lost to the Taliban. That is a fact. NATO was there. Taliban kicked their ass, because they just good at terrorizing people. That's all they like to do. But those days is over with. They are getting terrorized.
Into the Caribbean. Maduro says he's prepping for armed struggle in case of a U.S. attack. What are we doing there? Colonel Douglas McGregor said it best on our show this week. He said, I can't wrap my head around it. There's zero strategic reason to attack and overthrow Venezuelan government. And yet the people in Washington can't stop themselves. So let's connect the dots here. Durov warns us the Balkans are once again a flashpoint for global war. NATO is meddling in Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, the very kind of powder keg that lit World War I. Putin has permanently turned away from Europe toward China. Trump's missteps shoved India into the multipolar camp. Putin is laying down red lines over NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. Washington is opening a new front in Venezuela when its own military advisors and leaders can't even see the logic of that. They don't know why he's doing that. And then you have the China summit where Putin, Xi, and Modi told the world in no uncertain terms the new world order is here. So that's the news update part of today's.
Every president has did this type of shit. A lot of Epstein hearings is going on right now. They pointing out Trump. That's a fact. So he got to find somewhere to lob some bombs and stuff. That's what every president do. But he getting in big trouble. He wanted it to be Iran. But like I said, those hypersonic missiles got to flowing. He had to look somewhere else. So they came up with this drug lord Maduro scheme, which is shameful of the U.S. to call that man a motherfucking drug lord while they in business with the real drug lords in South America. That shit is crazy. But the best they can do is hit fishing boats and say they're killing traffickers, because if they absolutely hit anything in Venezuela, all bets is off. It's going to be a real war, and he is going to be humiliated. And they're going to be hurry up and try to negotiate a ceasefire. Remember I said that. After they asses told new ass, fuck with Venezuela.
Well, the biggest geopolitical event of 2025 just went down in China this past week. And things are serious when India's prime minister rejects not one, but 4 phone calls from Donald Trump, and instead makes his first state visit to China in 7 years to join Xi, Putin.
Trump said calling that man after you humiliated India because you scared of China, can't fight Russia, so you decide to bully India, threaten Venezuela, tariff India. Then behind the scenes, you called and trying to negotiate a deal. Man, they was tired of that. They got tired of being humiliated like that, bro. So they said, fuck it, we might as well. India has been the one holding out on BRICS really becoming a power, and then they've really been able to deal with NATO because they've been playing both sides of the fence. But Trump, dumb behind, made the wrong move and humiliated them people, and now they done went back into the embrace of Russia and China full-fledged now, and now the U.S. empire is finished.
And other world leaders for an event that many geopolitical experts are now calling the official shift of the global world order. You see, the decision to slap India with a 30% tariff was already a costly mistake for the US government. But when Donald Trump decided to impose an additional 25% tariff on India to penalize the country for buying Russian oil, this enraged the entire Indian nation, as they immediately saw this as an attack against their national sovereignty. India is the fastest growing economy in the world.
It's not just an attack on their sovereignty. China buys more oil from Russia than they do. It was the ultimate humiliation before the world. Trump had already lost to China in the tariff war. He couldn't do that again. So he had to pick India, which pissed them off. If you wanted to sanction somebody for dealing with Russia, you're supposed to do the number one buyer, which was China. and he went to India, and that was a mistake. They stood up for their goddamn self.
World. They need access to inexpensive crude oil. And why should India stop purchasing Russian oil when even the United States to this day is still importing Russian uranium? It's just another example of the consistent hypocrisy coming out of the White House and why many nations across the globe do not.
Trump talking about sanctioning Russia, secondary sanctions, Putin just laughing, bro. He like, okay, you do that? I'm going to sanction your ass on uranium. Uranium? Wait a minute. Ain't that what we need to deal with our nuclear facilities? Absolutely. Come on. These people stupid. Putin is a chess master. Go ahead, keep playing with them, and you're going to shut these nuclear facilities down in the U.S. because we don't have the capacity to refine nuclear material.
Not care what the US government says anymore. Trump's decision to penalize India, a staggering 55% tariff, may go down as the single biggest foreign policy blunder of an already historically disastrous administration. And if you don't believe me, just think about this. Just last year, Chinese and Indian armies were literally involved in a border dispute that resulted in casualties on both sides. Fast forward to today, and their leaders are shaking hands face to face for the first time in 7 years on Chinese soil. And the only reason it's happening is because Donald Trump messed up America's most important partnership in Asia. Trump promised to MAGA, but I guess it's now really clear what that acronym stands for. Make Asia Great Again. You see, we all know Donald Trump enjoys using tariffs as a way to bully nations around and force them to the negotiating table. But attack a nation's sovereignty? That's a game that India and Prime Minister Modi isn't going to play. Instead of bowing to Trump's emperor attitude, he did the exact opposite. He hopped on a plane to Tianjin for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, and he made sure the world knew it. Modi posted photos smiling in a limousine with Vladimir Putin and sharing warm greetings and laughs with Xi Jinping, a direct and very public humiliation of Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the US sat helpless on the sidelines, watching years of strategy to divide Asia all fall apart overnight. The US Embassy in India sent this post on X, sharing a quote from Marco Rubio and how the enduring friendship between India and China is the bedrock of our cooperation. But let's be honest, it's just another out-of-touch post from the US government and just a last-ditch effort to save face. But it's now time to say the quiet part out loud. The US government knows it's lost India as Trump pushed Modi right back into the hands of his BRICS alliance with China and Russia. So in today's video, we'll discuss India's humiliation of Trump on the world stage, Asia's vision for a post-US world order, and the powerful message China sent to the world with their historic military parade. This is going to be an action-packed episode. Let's jump in. When historians look back at the collapse of the US hegemony and the dawn of the multipolar world, they may very well point to this exact blunder by Trump and the SCO summit that followed. That's how monumental this mistake truly was. As both the world's fastest growing economy and its most populous nation, India occupied a pivotal place in the US strategy in Asia. Washington's containment plan relied on the Quad, with Japan and Australia, but it was India's position on China's border that gave the alliance its sharpest edge. But now that ship has sailed, America's vision of an Indo-Pacific alignment has collapsed in real time, and with it, the core of Washington's grand strategy in the region. This is nothing short of a disaster for the neocons desperate to ignite a second Cold War with China and Russia. And if you really want to understand just how colossal a mistake this is for US foreign policy, just listen to the words of John Bolton, a former Trump advisor who now admits this mistake will cost the US for decades to come.
There's a lot of bad news here, very little good news. The West has spent decades, US in particular, trying to wean India away from its Cold War attachment to Soviet Union, Russia, buying sophisticated weapons from them. And cautioning India on the danger posed by China. This is symbolized by what's called the Asian Security Quad: Japan, India, Australia, and the United States. A lot of effort to make India more amenable to cooperation with these countries. Donald Trump in the past weeks has essentially upended that, and for a variety of reasons now sent India back toward Russia to grow closer to China, and just shredding these decades of efforts to try and change that alignment. I'm not saying this can't be fixed, but it's going to take a lot of work, and I don't see it starting anytime soon.
Now, while John Bolton insists that this relationship can still be salvaged and that Washington can return to business as usual, the reality is that that is far from guaranteed. India, once seen by its critics as an obstacle to the multipolar world because of its close ties with Washington and its willingness to block major BRICS moves like Pakistan's admission, has now been pushed into a corner. Trump's tariffs forced its hand, and by choosing its BRICS partners over the US, India has removed a vital ally from Washington's strategy in Asia. Geopolitical analyst Glenn Deason, who has been a frequent guest on our channel, says it best. The US is angry that India chose China and Russia over it. This is wrong. The US threatens India with the ultimatum of us or them, while China and Russia do not. India chose independence and freedom to decide its own foreign policy. This past week's conference wasn't just transformative for India-China relations, it was a turning point for Asia as a whole. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, was originally founded as a security bloc to help Asian countries combat separatism, extremism, and terrorism. Remarkably, it even managed to bring historic rivals, India and Pakistan, into cooperation under the same framework. But what began as a narrowly focused security organization has steadily expanded its mission year after year. Today, the SCO has evolved into a platform addressing nearly every dimension of the emerging multipolar world, and this year's summit was the most ambitious yet. President Xi Jinping set the tone from the start that the point of this summit was to prepare for the post-US world order. In his opening statement, he delivered a thinly veiled challenge to the United States, declaring, "The world has entered a new phase of turbulence and a new crossroads. The shadows of Cold War mentality and bullying have not dissipated, and new challenges continue to mount." Among the summit's most prominent goals was the call for joint efforts to build a more just and balanced international governance framework, one where countries, regardless of size, wealth, or population, are treated as equals. The vision outlined was nothing less than a complete transformation of global institutions like the UN into a system where every nation has an equal voice in shaping the future order. One of the biggest critiques centers on the United Nations, where the United States and its Western allies hold a wildly disproportionate share of global influence. The Security Council's 5 permanent members are the US, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and China. Yet the entire global south has virtually no representation. India, the world's most populous nation and the 3rd largest economy by purchasing power parity, doesn't even have a seat, nor do other regional powers with hundreds of millions of people, like Brazil or Indonesia. Meanwhile, countries whose global prominence peaked decades ago, such as the UK and France, remain permanent members with veto power, and that veto power has been repeatedly abused. The US and its allies have used it to shield their interests, blocking overwhelmingly popular measures, such as ending the blockade on Cuba or condemning Israel for its ongoing crimes in Gaza. The result is a global governance system tilted towards the West's minority interest at the expense of the majority of humanity. But this summit was by no means all talk. The participating members agreed to a flurry of tangible commitments and projects that will reshape Eurasia starting from this day forward. One of the most significant announcements was the massive new pipeline project, Power of Siberia 2, which will connect Russia to China through Mongolia and build on the existing Power of Siberia 1. This is another massive energy pillar for China, a huge revenue boost for the Russian economy, and a key point of cooperation with SCO member Mongolia, creating a clear win-win-win for the entire region. The imagery couldn't be more stark. A twin pipeline system supplying cheap Russian gas mirrors exactly the situation Europe enjoyed with Nord Stream 1 and 2 until the United States government sabotaged them during the Ukraine conflict. Instead of forging their own path, striking major deals with China, or pursuing peace talks with Russia, European leaders have bent over backwards to please the US government, the very government that destroyed their cheap energy and their economies. Honestly speaking, the incompetence of European politicians and their vassalization to Washington is simply astounding. And of course, no serious discussion of the multipolar world is complete without talking about de-dollarization. At this summit, member states reaffirmed their commitment to expanding trade in local currencies. But the real game changer came with the announcement of the SCO Development Bank. This development bank is a bold challenge to the Western-controlled World Bank and IMF. The bank will back innovative financing, from digital initiatives to green projects, putting the power of development back in the hands of the global south. This is a massive milestone in the bloc's long-term plan of creating a payment system that operates entirely out of Washington's control. As if the SCO summit wasn't enough, just 2 days later, China followed it up with a massive military parade, marking the 80th anniversary of its victory over Japanese aggression in World War II. The SCO summit showcased China's vision for peaceful development, but the parade reminded everyone about the firepower to back up that vision. The message was unmistakable. China welcomes cooperation, but if you try to mess with it, you'll be facing a military that can hold its own against anyone. Predictably, Western media rushed to spin it as aggression, but that narrative falls apart under basic scrutiny. The parade explicitly stated that China's armed forces are defensive in nature and a deterrent, not a tool for foreign conquest. The parade also had two major goals. First, that China will never again allow itself to be devastated as it was in World War II. And second, a direct warning to Washington. This is not a war you want to fight. Fear-mongering concerns proved to be nothing more than Western projection. Leaders from across the global South showed up in force, underscoring both China's growing diplomatic reach and its ability to represent the true global majority. In total, 26 leaders from 26 different countries were in attendance. Among them were major players outside the West, including prime ministers from Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Pakistan, Belarus, and many more marginalized countries, all showing clear solidarity with China. By contrast, Europe was almost entirely absent. Only two European leaders, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico and Serbian President Alexander Vučić, made the trip to Beijing. Their small numbers highlighted just how little independent foreign policy remains on the European continent. Beyond these two Balkan nations, there are only a handful of Western figures willing to define the prevailing narrative. Former Australian and New Zealand prime ministers were in attendance, alongside former Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatoyama, one of the very few Japanese politicians who has ever fully acknowledged and apologized for Japan's wartime aggression. To this day, Japan has never issued a formal apology for its role in World War II, making Hatoyama's stance not just rare, but a complete outlier in his country's politics. But no guest stood out more than North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin, who flanked Xi Jinping on the red carpet. The image was unmistakable. Three of Washington's biggest foreign policy targets.
They were so hot about that picture with Kim, Putin, and Xi. Man, what does it mean? What is the symbol? What does it mean? What the fuck it mean? Kim been begging Putin to let, man, he is the tech dog. He want these people. He want the war. Kim like, man, bro, let's do this. These people been starving my people, talking shit. Only way we could be free is getting rid of them. The U.S. and Europe, talking about sanctioning North Korea. They'll tell you all these people is isolated. See, that's another thing this did. That Putin is isolated. I just laugh when they say that Putin, the West, has rejected. Man, people give a damn about no West. No one gives a shit about Europe no more. And the U.S. need to wake up before they with them. The world is moving on, doing big business. They don't need them for shit. Europe is a thing of the past. The U.S. need to wake up. They're giving the U.S. a chance to join the world. This is world leaders. Fucking U.S. talking about world leaders. They had a puppets from Britain and France. Well, nobody listening to them people. This is the world leaders.
Standing shoulder to shoulder in unity, and it sent a message straight to the White House, one that was clearly not well received. Donald Trump took to Truth Social with an incredibly bitter post, trying to center the entire moment into being all about America's role in the conflict. America's participation in World War II was admirable, and for once, on the right side of history. But let's not forget, it was China that was invaded, and it was China that sacrificed
all sides in World War II. America didn't want to get in the motherfucking war. They didn't want to get in the war. They chose to go fight the brown people. They've been wanting to fight the Japanese to break up the Japanese empire and go seize land in Asia. Never wanted to fight the Germans. Even after they defeated Germany, they said that they really fought. Patton said we fought the wrong people. He wanted to fight the Soviets. You see, the U.S. wanted Britain to go down so they could take over the world. And before World War II, Britain had the biggest navy and all that type of shit. Still had empire. The U.S. wanted that shit. Trump can say whatever he want. The U.S. didn't do shit in World War II. They don't deserve no pats on the back. Soviets defeated the Russians. France surrendered in 3-4 days. Those punks better ever talk about World War II. Britain needs to be thankful. Stalin dealt with Hitler. That's why they don't like to talk about World War II. They hate discussing it, especially Europe. But nobody owed the U.S.
a
no
staggering
favors.
20 million
World War II.
people.
They didn't do shit.
Centering the United States in
They
China's
hit the Nazis.
history is both insulting and done in complete bad faith. And as if this lack of sincerity wasn't already clear enough, Trump finished by writing, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America."
They should never let this nigga. They should never let this nigga release that tweet. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, as you conspire. People all over the world was quoting that and laughing, but showing just how petty the U.S. is. Reporters asked Putin why he was in China about this. Putin laughed and said how Trump makes jokes and stuff, but nobody conspiring against the fucking U.S. Like he said. We're having this meeting. No one's mentioning you. They're mentioning the problems the world face. That's what's wrong with the fucking U.S. America shouldn't be going along with this bullshit. Because world leaders meeting, oh, you got to be against us. You the problem. You understand that? And I've been telling people, America is the Fourth Reich. The whole world, see, that's the problem. We're in a problem where nuking the U.S. would be, relieve a headache for the motherfucking world. If something happened to the U.S., the whole world would be like, man, thank you, Lord. It's finally Rome is gone. Finally, Germany has been defeated. Finally, the end of Genghis Khan. That type of shit. History is waiting to say, oh shit, finally that U.S. empire is finished.
Okay. Seriously, name me one country on earth that would want to work with this man. What kind of message does this send to Putin about the sincerity of Ukraine peace talks after Trump had literally just met with him in Alaska only weeks ago? Why would Modi tie himself closer to this chaos? Why would Xi Jinping give rare earth minerals to someone sending bitter, threatening messages on social media? Apart from the US vessels in Europe, Trump has completely lost all credibility. Just months ago, the United States embarrassed itself on the world stage with a hollow, unimpressive military parade featuring outdated equipment and low attendance. A stark contrast to what was on display in Beijing this week.
They never did that bullshit, bro. Ego. Man, China definitely showing videos of that, but people all over the world in Africa, they laughing. They comparing the two. They comparing the two parades. They comparing the military equipment, bro, and it is shameful. It's military experts saying you could tell the march, how soldiers march, and the crisp of the march, how trained they is and how prepared they is. Just small details to certain shit. The humiliation of one parade. These from world powers, two world powers. Look like varsity and fucking freshman, bro.
And this entire situation is a mess of Donald Trump's own making. Everyone, we're going to continue monitoring everything coming out of Beijing, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS,
and display so much advanced weaponry. And then some people in the U.S. are saying, well, they don't want to show all this stuff. They want to keep it. Oh, man, go on that bullshit. China got shit they ain't gonna show neither. But you talking about you the power? Put that shit out there and display it before the world like China did. Have people on and on at their nuclear arsenal and they laser arsenal. But this you the U.S. They done ripped us off, bro. They done ripped us off. They done put that junk out there if you want to. We want our money back. So they said a few things out there. Man, it's a scam that happened, the biggest scam in history, bro. Have the Americans thinking that they have all this super advanced shit. But when the wars come, listen, right here on this channel we displayed, bro. They sent everything they had to Ukraine, man, except nuclear submarines and their nuclear bombers. Everything else in the F-35, everything else from the tanks, from the javelins, you see, from all our Patriot systems, man, that's the humiliation of the whole world. The Patriot system was supposed to have been the creme de la creme of advanced air defense systems. Not no more. Russia exposed that. They hunted that shit, blown it up. The Abrams tank, that got blown up. Huh? All of your greatest artillery systems, that's blown up. Nothing, they could do nothing with it versus the Russians. That's a fact. Come on, bro. The biggest scam in the world is they lied to the Americans. That's why you can't have no fucking military parade, because you'll rip their head off. They put that shit out there. You're like, hold on, what the fuck? So they want to say, no, it's in the warehouse. We ain't finna show the world what we got. So they says China gonna copy us. Man, you been lying. Nobody copying you. fuck, China got shit you could never have. What the fuck they copied you? Bro, they got hypersonic missiles. They get people out there to say China copied their hypersonic missiles. The fuck they did and you ain't got none?
Everything that is featuring in this new multipolar world. But there is one question that remains, and it's something that many geopolitical experts are now wondering. How strong is China's military? And can it compete with other powerful militaries around the world? Interesting enough, this will be the exact topic of our next episode as we take a deep dive into China's military, showing you exactly what was on display in Beijing and give you the simple facts and the truth that Western media will not accurately report. Everyone, stay tuned.
Reunify with Taiwan, the U.S. gonna mind their motherfucking business. That's a fact. Strong enough where the U.S. is rethinking their whole strategy. That's why it's the art of war. You win the war without having to fight. That's what China just did, the art of war. They defeated them punks without having to fire any shots. That was the warning. When they displayed all that motherfucking weaponry out there, nigga, that's the warning. You don't want to see it in live action. Come on, bro. We seen the U.S. working in Afghanistan, man. Them people ain't perfect.
Gold is a symbol of wealth and status that's lasted for centuries.
Out of his mind, bro. This nigga renamed the Department of Defense Department of War. This all is an act. They want to be tough. Putin over there really winning wars, kicking their ass. Trump just signed a peace. You signed a deal with the Houthi rebels after losing the Battle of the Red Sea. Get the fuck. You lost the Battle of the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels. You talking tough to Venezuela. Renaming our defense the Department of War. Okay, buddy. Okay.
Associated with all things luxurious in general, it's yielded mixed returns for investors during high inflationary periods.
Gold is at record high prices, and silver prices are at 13-year highs. And they aren't rising because of US inflation. They're rising because the world no longer trusts America. Precious metals are far more than commodities. They're barometers of trust. And right now, those barometers are flashing red for the United States. We're seeing job creation numbers consistently weaker than expected. Unemployment in the US is ticking upwards. The Federal Reserve, once a symbol of control, is now boxed in, unable to hike interest rates without breaking growth, unable to hold without markets collapsing, and being forced towards rate cuts that scream fragility rather than strength. And then in the political arena, you have Donald Trump floating the idea of renaming the Department of Defense into the Department of War. At first glance, it sounds like a joke. But in geopolitics, word matters, symbols matter, and this one reveals something deeper, a psychology, not of confidence, but of insecurity. Strong empires don't shout their strength. Weak ones rename themselves to hide their insecurity. But the story doesn't end in Washington. It's global. India refused to bend the knee to American pressure on Russian oil. China just paraded its military power for the world to see. The SCO expands. Japan receives further concessions long after the trade deal was signed, because Washington cannot afford to upset its allies when the Quad is already under stress. Taken together, these threads weave a picture of a superpower that is no longer dictating the rules, but negotiating to barely hold the line. The United States looks less like the unchallenged Rome of old and more like an empire slowly adapting to multipolar reality, or at least should be adapting to the multipolar reality. And that, more than anything else, explains why gold and now even silver are shining bright. Let's dive in deeper. Watch till the end. I will start with economics and I'll end with the psychology of this whole thing. Beginning with the economy, because in today's world, economics is power. Friday's release of the US payrolls data tells the story. Month after month, job creation is coming in lower than expected in the United States. Meanwhile, unemployment, while still historically low, has started to begin to creep up. It's not a crisis yet, but it's enough to shake confidence. Earlier last month, President Trump fired the commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which publishes this report. He wasn't happy with the numbers that the commission was putting out. The lady's crime was to revise down the number of jobs being created in earlier months. His allegation was she was politically motivated and manipulating the numbers. Now he's going to put in place his own person for the job. This isn't statistics, it's politics though. And it's shaking the confidence in United States institutions. Economists and past BLS officials have dismissed his allegations as being baseless. They've explained that revisions are routine and they stem from the way the agency receives the data over time and is nothing to do with political bias. As a foreign salesperson in Lehman Brothers in my earlier life, I can 100% agree with what they're saying. We saw many numbers come out retroactively, actually saying that the numbers that were given out earlier were higher or lower, either way. Now, for decades, United States labor markets have been the envy of the world. They're flexible, they're resilient, and they're innovative. But now, investors see the cracks. Companies are cautious. Consumers are being stretched. And the broader US economy looks fragile, with the growth slowing and the debt piling up. The United States government debt is now over $37 trillion, according to the Treasury's own calculations. It stands around 126% of the country's GDP. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be the guardian of stability. But what do we see instead? A central bank that's trapped. Inflation hasn't disappeared, but growth is too weak to justify much higher rates. And that leaves only one path: cutting. And when the Fed cuts into weakness, that's not a policy, that's panic. And to make matters worse, Donald Trump has been harassing Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman. Donald Trump's relationship with the Federal Reserve has never been about quiet respect for institutional independence. It has been about pressure, out in the open, out in public, and relentless. When Jerome Powell was appointed as Fed chair in 2018, by Trump's team, Trump expected loyalty. Instead, Powell delivered interest rate hikes in the face of inflationary risks at the time. And what followed was a barrage, unlike anything modern Fed leaders had seen. Trump called him clueless. He suggested that he was worse than China in harming the US economy. This time round, Trump has labeled him Jerome Too Late Powell. He's also called him a stubborn moron. He's demanded significant immediate interest rate cuts. And he's added that if Powell doesn't comply, the Fed boards should assume control and do what everyone knows has to be done. And he's been floating the idea that he might even fire Powell outright, something that no president has seriously threatened in living memory. For the markets, though, what does this signal? It's a dramatic sign that a central bank that prided itself on apolitical technocracy was being dragged onto the political stage. But Powell isn't the only one in crosshairs. Now, Trump has fired Lisa Cook, the first black woman ever appointed to a Fed Board of Governors. He called her out for alleged mortgage fraud, calling it deceitful and potentially a criminal conduct. Cook, in return, has sued Trump's administration, and she's argued that the president lacked any authority to remove her. And her supporters say it's because she didn't vote for the rate cuts when Trump wants them. Now, the result is a central bank caught between its statutory mandate and a political storm, one where every decision is second-guessed as partisan maneuvering. And this matters because the dollar itself is built on perception. Every treasury bond bought by a foreign government, every oil deal priced in dollars, every international loan that's denominated in the greenback, all of this rests on the belief that America is stable, powerful, and in control. And there lies the deeper issue. Once the Fed is no longer perceived to be independent, the dollar itself begins to lose credibility. Investors around the world aren't just reading the jobs data or rate announcements. They're reading the politics behind them. And when they see that the White House publicly harassing the Fed chair, undermining governors, and signaling that monetary policy is a campaign tool, they understand that the United States institutions are weakening from within the country. And that perception alone pushes capital into alternatives. And once again, into that timeless refuge of gold or silver. So when precious metals rise, it's not just about inflation hedging. It's a silent referendum on trust. Trust in the United States economy, in the Fed, in the dollar. And increasingly, that trust is eroding. Now let's talk about symbolism. Because empires don't just project power through armies and banks. They project it through psychology. President Donald Trump just signed an executive order that authorizes the Secretary of Defense, the Department of Defense, and subordinate officials to use secondary titles such as Secretary of War, Department of War, and Deputy Secretary of War, for example, in their official correspondence, in their public communications, in ceremonial contexts, and other non-statutory documents within the executive branch. The Pentagon has been referred to as the Department of Defense since the 1940s. Any official name change would actually require an act of Congress. But using secondary titles gets around that issue. And as you know by now, Donald Trump is all about quick fixes.
Equipment, money. So we use super glue instead. Go ahead, put it on there.
The president believes that the new name projects strength and resolve. And the order adds that the United States military is the strongest and most lethal fighting force in the world and should have a name that reflects its unmatched power and readiness.
We have the strongest military in the world. We have the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest manufacturers of equipment by far. There's nobody to even compete. And you see that with this and so many other things.
The name changes come after China hosted its military parade on September the 3rd in Beijing. The event was attended by Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. China unveiled some of its new military technology, including advanced tanks, drones, anti-drone lasers, stealth fighter jets, and autonomous naval vessels, among other systems. All of which analysts say showed that China is now more focused on the multi-domain, the joint operations, in a similar fashion to the United States, and that threatens the US. Now, Donald Trump's idea of renaming the Department of Defense into the Department of War may sound like theater, but it reflects something deeper. Strong powers don't need to advertise their strength. They don't need to shout or rename or posture. Their very existence radiates confidence. Weak powers, on the other hand, compensate. They talk louder. They lean on symbolic gestures. They try to show strength because they fear it's slipping. Think of Rome in its later centuries. As its borders shrank, as its enemies grew bolder, its rhetoric grew more dramatic. War was more on its lips than peace. And yet that rhetoric couldn't hide the fact that Rome was reacting to the world, not shaping it. That's the psychology of decline. And that's what Trump's proposal reveals. Not confidence, but insecurity. A defensive empire that feels the need to rename itself just to protect its toughness. Markets pick up on the psychology. Investors don't just read spreadsheets. They read the mood, the tone, the posture. And right now, America's posture looks defensive. Check out the whole vlog I just did on this renaming and the US reaction to China's display of its military power. I will put a link in the description below as well. Across the world, Washington's ability to dictate terms is eroding, and the evidence is piling up. Take India. When Trump rolled out his sweeping 50% tariff against the Indians, US officials assumed that New Delhi would blink. After all, India needed access to United States markets, and the pressure was immense. But instead of folding, India has pushed back. It still is importing Russian crude oil, at least for now. It continues to refine it in massive volumes and is still selling that fuel back into global markets, much of which ends up in the West, especially in Europe. Rather than weaken, India's doubled down. It's starting to diversify its trade routes. It's leaning more heavily into SCO and BRICS frameworks. It went and visited China. The tariffs hardened its resolve. For Washington, it's been a sobering lesson. Even a Quad partner, bolstered by the US to act as the counterweight to China, now acts on its own terms. And then there's Japan. After hitting India with the tariffs, the White House knew it couldn't afford another rupture inside the Quad. So Tokyo has just been quietly handed a gift. US officials granted Japanese automakers an additional 15% benefit, a reduction in tariffs, which for the Japanese had said for a while they were due to get as part of their trade deal. But the United States side had stayed quiet, and it looked as if they were not going to be on the cards until now. Another interesting thing to note, when Trump peevishly posted on Wednesday in response to seeing the pictures of the Chinese military parade, the big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive support and blood that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its freedom from a very unfriendly invader. He wrote unfriendly invader, and he did not name the Japanese. As we know, Trump is not afraid to take names. So why did Trump refuse to name Japan as the invader? This wasn't economics, it was politics. Washington feared that squeezing India and antagonizing Japan at the same time would fracture the alliance architecture in Asia. So it conceded, reinforcing a perception that the United States no longer dictates, but bargains. Meanwhile, China chose this moment to stage its largest military parade in years. Those hypersonic missiles, advanced naval formations, air power displays. It wasn't just for domestic pride. It was broadcast to the world, a deliberate contrast to US weakness. For Beijing, the message was simple. China is ascendant, confident, and not afraid to show it. For US policymakers, the optics were humiliating, watching rival project strength while Washington scrambling to hold its partners in line due to those tariffs and giving out concessions now. And all of this plays out under that shadow of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Once a modest forum, the SCO now is an expanding bloc along with BRICS, pulling together major Eurasian powers under a vision that explicitly sidesteps Washington. With India engaging, Russia entrenched, and China leading, the SCO is increasingly seen as a counterweight to US-led institutions. Putting these pieces together, and the pattern is clear. The US is no longer shaping outcomes from a position of strength. It's reacting. Tariffs which were meant to assert dominance backfired with India. Concessions meant to preserve alliances to placate Japan. Military optics favored China, and the SCO continues to expand that multipolar order. The psychology here is simple. Beijing's projecting confidence and Washington's projecting anxiety. These three examples, India, China, and Japan, show the same pattern. US pressure no longer guarantees compliance. Instead, it leads to resistance or having to give concessions or further humiliating optics, like, for example, we've seen with China. This isn't strength, it's insecurity, and Washington is having to blink again and again, what we call Trump taco. This shows the multipolar world in action, not a world where one country replaces the United States, but one where the US is just on one pole among several. And in that world, the dollar's losing its monopoly, the Fed loses its aura of omnipotence, and precious metals gain. Because when investors see uncertainty in global order, they look for the oldest form of certainty, gold and silver. History tells us great powers rarely collapse overnight. They erode gradually through 1,000 small cuts or humiliations, through 100 small concessions, through symbols that once would have been unthinkable, but now feel normal. Payrolls missing targets, rate cuts into weakness, Trump's Department of War, India refusing pressure, China displaying strength, Japan extracting concessions. Individually, all of these are just small stories, each one being a piece of the puzzle. But together they reveal a picture of a United States struggling to maintain the psychology of strength, while the world increasingly perceives weakness. The age of that unipolar dominance is definitely over. Multipolarity is here, and here's the truth. Decline is as much psychological as it is material. Once allies sense weakness, they act differently. Once rivals sense insecurity, they become bolder. And once markets sense fragility, they will reprice assets. That's why precious metals are rising, because they're not just commodities. They're a mirror of the empire. And right now, that mirror reflects a United States more insecure than at any point in decades. When gold shines, it's not a bet on metal. It's a bet against an empire. And today, that empire is America. Thank you for watching me today.
China and Russia are today politically closer than they have ever been in history. This was symbolically illustrated this September when Russian President Vladimir Putin traveled to Beijing to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping and to attend an event celebrating the 80th anniversary of their victory in World War II. And many other prominent leaders of the Global South also attended, including the heads of state of Indonesia and Vietnam and Iran, and even Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. The images of these leaders standing together was a clear message to the West. The geopolitical order is changing. The years of Western domination have ended. And at the core of the new multipolar world order that is being built is the close partnership between China and Russia. This is very distressing to the US government because the stated policy in Washington is to try to maintain global dominance to prevent the emergence of what the US calls near-peer strategic competitors. And the US military is very concerned because there are now two near-peer competitors in the world, and they are closely partnered together. That is China and Russia. This is precisely why the Donald Trump administration has put a lot of energy in trying to divide Russia and China, trying to woo Moscow in order to isolate Beijing. Just a few days before the 2024 presidential election that Trump won, he pledged that he would divide Russia and China.
You never want Russia and China uniting. We united them. It's a shame. The stupidity of what they've done. Well, I'm going to have to ununite them, and I think I can do that too. I have to ununite them.
This is Washington's divide and conquer strategy, and it explains why in February 2025, just a few weeks after Trump returned for his second term as US president, he sent top US officials to Saudi Arabia to hold talks with Russia, and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio proposed that the US should try to partner with Russia.
The credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically on issues of common interest and frankly economically.
Now, when some people heard those remarks from the US Secretary of State, they said, wow, the Trump administration is trying to pursue peace. But this is not about peace. This is a cynical imperial strategy of divide and conquer. The real goal of the US is to try to improve relations with Russia in order to break the close partnership between Moscow and Beijing. And Marco Rubio, who is a lifelong neoconservative war hawk who has supported every single US war, he let the cat out of the bag in his Senate confirmation hearing, where he said very clearly that China is the biggest so-called threat to the US empire ever, and that everything in the 21st century is going to revolve around the US attempt to isolate and destabilize China.
The Communist Party of China that leads the PRC, is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor now, and in every realm. It's an extraordinary challenge. It's one that I believe will define the 21st century. When they write the book about the 21st century, there's going to be some chapters in there about Putin. There's going to be some chapters in there about some of these other places. But the bulk of that book about the 21st century will be not just about China, but about the relationship between China and the United States and what direction it went.
Now, Donald Trump was very confident that he could divide China and Russia, but his strategy was simply implausible from the very beginning. I already talked about how today, in the 2020s, China and Russia are closer politically than they have ever been in history. China's President Xi took a symbolic trip to Moscow in May, and he was Putin's guest of honor as they celebrated the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany in World War II. During this trip, Xi and Putin signed dozens of agreements, and they published a joint statement that was more than 8,000 words long, in which they emphasized that, quote, China-Russia relations have reached the highest level in history, end quote, and they vowed to, quote, jointly resist any attempts to interfere with and disrupt the traditional friendship and deep mutual trust between China and Russia, end quote. So politically, the idea that Trump could somehow do a 180 in U.S. foreign policy and ally with Russia against China was completely absurd from the very beginning. And economically, this idea makes even less sense because China is Russia's largest trading partner by far. China is extremely important to the Russian economy. Over 30% of Russia's exports go to China, and over 1/3 of Russia's imports come from China. And China and Russia have very complementary economies. China is the world's manufacturing superpower, and Russia is the world's commodities superpower. Russia is one of the world's top producers of oil and natural gas, many strategic minerals, grains, and fertilizer. And if you look at what Russia exports to China, it's many of those strategic commodities that China needs as a massive country with 1.4 billion people. That's a lot of mouths to feed. The US, on the other hand, does very little trade with Russia. And in fact, Russia and the US are competitors in many sectors because the US, like Russia, is also one of the world's leading producers of oil and natural gas and grains and many other agricultural goods and meat. If you look at what the US exports, the US does export some technologies and some consumer goods, but a lot of US exports also consist of major commodities like oil. So the US is actually competing with Russia. And what would the US sell to Russia that Russia doesn't already have? I mean, Trump could try to force Russia to buy US cars, Ford and GM cars. But I don't think Russians want US cars. They're happy with Chinese cars and Japanese cars and Korean cars and Russian cars. So both politically and economically, it does not make sense for Russia to ally with the US against China, considering that, again, China is Russia's largest trading partner and Russia's neighbor. Trump simply doesn't have anything that he can offer Russia other than sanctions relief, which Russia cannot even have confidence in anyway, because when Trump eventually leaves office, whoever the next US president is, they could simply reimpose sanctions on Russia. So why would Moscow sacrifice its relations with its most important partner on behalf of Washington? It doesn't make sense. So this is why Russian President Putin has been making it very clear to Trump that the US should not even bother trying to divide China and Russia. This was one of the obvious takeaways of Putin's trip to Beijing this September. And I want to talk more about this trip and the historic event that was held on the 3rd of September, marking the 80th anniversary of the victory over the Japanese Empire in World War II. I talked about the very symbolic photos that were published showing the Chinese President Xi, the Russian President Putin, the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and also leaders of many other important global South countries, including the leaders of Indonesia and Vietnam and Iran and Kazakhstan and other Central Asian republics. There were also Latin American leaders and representatives from Cuba and Nicaragua, and also African representatives. This was a clear display of global South unity, symbolically against Western imperialism and fascism. And the Financial Times, the major Western newspaper, I think it did put it well when it said that this event, this massive military parade in which China's leader Xi was surrounded by many important leaders from the global South, what this showed is that China is part of an attempt to reshape the world order, to create a more multipolar world. Now, in another video, which I will link to in the description below, I talked about how India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also visited China in order to attend the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this was also deeply symbolic because the US government has for decades tried to divide China and India in order to isolate Beijing. But as I explained, Donald Trump has ironically undone a lot of those efforts by constantly attacking India and imposing 50% tariffs on India that will do a lot of damage to the Indian economy. So if you want to learn more about the improving relations between China and India, I will link to that other video in the description below. And US President Trump was obviously very angry about this successful meeting in Beijing. I can't help but think that Trump was also mad because the Chinese military showed much more discipline in its march than the disastrous so-called march that Trump tried to hold in Washington. I mean, the US military showed itself to be completely unprofessional, completely disorganized. But regardless, Trump was obviously very angry that all of these leaders from the global South convened in Beijing to celebrate this anniversary. And Trump posted a furious message on his Twitter copy website, Truth Social, in which he demanded that China should be grateful for the U.S. support provided to China in World War II. And then he also wrote, quote, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America," end quote. So this is how in Washington they perceived this event. It's very clear which side actually feels pretty weak, despite the fact that Trump loves to talk about how strong and powerful the US empire is. It's obvious that he feels very insecure and troubled about this growing partnership, not only between China and Russia, but also among China, Russia, and North Korea, and many other global South countries that are tired of Western hegemony. They're tired of the Western imperial powers that colonized most of the world, trying to impose their will on the rest of the world. In fact, Trump basically admitted that his strategy to divide China, Russia, and India has failed. In a post on his Twitter copy website, Truth Social, Trump posted a photo of Xi with Putin and Modi, and he said, quote, "Looks like we've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China." Now, this post is very strange. He's referring to China like a villain in a Hollywood movie, deepest, darkest China. And it makes it clear that the US sees China as its mortal enemy. But what's even crazier about it is that an official White House account on Twitter, which is called Rapid Response 47, this official White House account published the post that Trump wrote, which shows how angry the US government is, how angry Trump is personally. But today I want to talk about the very close relations between Russia and China and how the Trump administration has completely failed to divide these two very important countries that are at the heart of this attempt to build a more multipolar world and challenge Western imperial hegemony. So first, I'm going to look at the diplomatic readout that was published by the Kremlin that summarizes the main points of the talks that were held between Putin and Xi on the 2nd of September. This readout said that Xi and Putin discussed, quote, further strengthening and promoting the comprehensive partnership and strategic interaction between Russia and China, end quote. They discussed many areas of cooperation, including healthcare, agriculture, nuclear energy, even a spacecraft mission. They also talked about how Russia and China can work together to advance education and science, jointly working on research projects. President Xi opened his remarks by referring to Putin as his longtime friend, and he emphasized that the close relations between China and Russia are not necessarily new in history, but in fact, you can go back to the 1930s and 40s when China and Russia were working together to fight against fascism and imperialism. And in China, they referred to World War II as the World Anti-Fascist War, because, of course, in the European theater, they were also fighting against German fascism and Italian fascism, and China was fighting against Japanese fascism. And President Xi highlighted the, quote, great responsibility of China and Russia as the main victorious countries in World War II, end quote. China and the Soviet Union contributed by far the most to the defeat of fascism and imperialism in World War II. More than 26 million Soviets died in the war, and up to 20 million Chinese also died in the war. And yet in the West, many students are not taught about the heroic sacrifice made by the peoples of the USSR and China. And in his speech, President Xi emphasized that, quote, Chinese-Russian relations have withstood the test of the international climate and stand as a model of interstate relations, good neighborliness, friendship, comprehensive strategic partnership, mutually beneficial cooperation, and shared success, end quote. President Putin also began his remarks referring to Xi as his dear friend, and he emphasized the, quote, strategic nature of Russian-Chinese ties, which have reached an unprecedented level, end quote. That's a very important quote, an unprecedented level, according to Putin. And then he talked about the symbolic importance of the 80th anniversary of the defeat of fascism in World War II, which again was first celebrated in Moscow in May and then in Beijing in September. And Putin said that, quote, our decision to jointly celebrate the anniversary of the great victory in Moscow and Beijing is a tribute to the heroism of our nations, the people of Russia and China during World War II, a reaffirmation of the key role our countries played in the European and Asian theaters of war, and a testament to our shared commitment to defending historical truth and justice, end quote. And then Putin emphasized how the close relations between China and Russia today have their roots going back many decades. Of course, there was the Sino-Soviet split in the 1960s and 70s, which for obvious reasons they don't want to discuss. But if you go back to the 1930s, the Soviet Union did provide support to China as it was fighting against the Japanese invaders. For the people of China, World War II began before it did in Europe, when Japan invaded China and colonized numerous parts of China. And the people of China fought back with support from the Soviet Union in the 1930s going into the 1940s. So this is a very important quote from Putin, who links that history to the situation today. Putin said, quote, we vividly remember our cooperation in the 1930s and in 1945, the memory of our combat brotherhood of trust, mutual assistance, and our resolute protection of our common interests laid the groundwork for the comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation between Russia and China in the new era. We stood together then, and we stand together now, end quote. So if you're sitting in Washington and you hear those words, it is very clear that Trump has failed and will continue to fail to divide Russia and China. Their partnership goes much deeper. It has its roots going back decades. The US has failed, period. Now, I also want to briefly look at an interview that Putin did with the Chinese state media outlet Xinhua. The interview is titled, Russia and China to Continue Working Together for Prosperity. Putin discussed the growing economic relations between Russia and China, And he said they have, quote, reached an unprecedented level, end quote. He noted that China is by far Russia's top trading partner. And this is very important. On the issue of de-dollarization, Putin stressed that nearly all of the transactions between Russia and China are being carried out in rubles and yuan, referring to the national currencies of Russia and China. China's currency is also known as the renminbi. So Putin is saying that they have de-dollarized their trade. They're no longer using dollars and euros in their trade. They're using their own currencies. Moreover, Putin discussed some of the investment that's going on in both of the two countries. For instance, there is now production happening inside Russia for Chinese cars and household appliances, and they're working together to build high-tech manufacturing and infrastructure facilities, and they have large-scale plans in the construction materials industry. Putin also discussed energy. He emphasized how Russia firmly retains its position as a leading exporter of oil and gas to China, and he noted that in 2027, they plan to launch another major gas route, the so-called Far Eastern gas route. And Putin talked about an existing pipeline, which is known as the Power of Siberia 1 pipeline, which connects Russia's eastern region to northern China, and then it connects to a series of Chinese pipelines going down to Shanghai. However, although Putin didn't mention this in his interview, Russia and China signed another very important agreement while Putin was visiting Beijing. And this includes plans to build a Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. This is absolutely historic because plans for this pipeline have been discussed for many years now, but it was not known if it will actually be launched. And now there are many reports that this is going to happen. Power of Siberia 2 will connect the pipeline systems in Western Russia to Eastern Russia to the Siberian region. And then that network will also connect to Power of Siberia 1 and will go into China. And this is very significant because this now means that China will be getting natural gas from the Yamal fields, from Russia's Yamal Peninsula in the north of the country. And previously, this gas had gone to Europe on the so-called Yamal Europe pipeline. But of course, because of the proxy war in Ukraine and the European sanctions on Russia, Europe is now trying to boycott not only Russian oil, but also Russian gas. So instead of selling that cheap pipeline gas to Europe, Russia is now going to redirect that gas to China on the new Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. This is a major development, and it's a symbol of how Russia sees that its economic future lies in deepening integration with China and Asia as a whole. So Russia continues to look east and south. It's no longer looking to the west. Moscow has clearly made the decision to deepen integration in Eurasia and not with Europe, and certainly not with the United States. In fact, Putin talked more about the importance of Eurasian integration in the interview that he did with the Chinese media outlet Xinhua. He talked about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit that was held in the Chinese city of Tianjin. And Putin said that this meeting will give the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, quote, powerful new momentum and strengthen its capacity and consolidate solidarity across our shared Eurasian space to shape a fairer, multipolar world order. And in the same vein, Putin also talked about the importance of BRICS and how it is fighting back against Western neocolonialism. Putin used the term neocolonialism. This is quite new for the Russian leader. In the past few years, his rhetoric has become more openly anti-colonial as he emphasizes the importance of Russia integrating with Eurasia and the larger global South, and no longer worrying about trying to get the West to accept Russia. We are in increasingly a post-Western world. And in this interview, Putin said, quote, we are working closely with China within BRICS to expand its role as a key pillar of the global architecture. Together, we advance initiatives aimed at expanding economic opportunities for member states, end quote, And of course, this includes using local currencies, not the US dollar, so countries of the global south can have more economic sovereignty and no longer need to rely on the US currency. Putin talked about how they're working together on critical infrastructure projects, and they are taking a, quote, common stand against discriminatory sanctions that hinder the economic development of our members in the world at large, end quote. And on this note, Putin called for reforming the global financial architecture and challenging neocolonialism. He said that China and Russia, quote, support the reform of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, end quote. The IMF and the World Bank are based in Washington. The US is the only country with veto power in these organizations. Putin emphasized that the world needs a, quote, new financial system that must be based on openness and true equity, providing equal and non-discriminatory access to its tools for all countries and reflecting the real standing of member states in the global economy. And then Putin added, quote, it is essential to end the use of finance as an instrument of neocolonialism, which runs counter to the interests of the global majority, end quote. This is a very important statement because what Putin is saying indirectly, but pretty clearly, is that the IMF and the World Bank, these existing financial institutions that are dominated by the US and the broader West, they are used as tools of neocolonialism. And the global South, which represents the global majority, want an alternative, demand an alternative, and they are building that alternative through these new organizations like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and like BRICS. And this is why Russia is deepening its partnership with many other global South countries, not just China. So for instance, when Putin was visiting Beijing, he also held a series of important meetings with other leaders, including Kim Jong-un, the leader of the DPRK, North Korea, which is quite symbolic because Russia and the DPRK also now have a military agreement, a partnership, and they're expanding cooperation in other areas. Putin also met with the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian, which is symbolic as well because Russia is deepening its partnership with Iran after the US and Israel waged war on Iran, an illegal war of aggression that was condemned by Russia and China and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They condemned that very clearly in the Tianjin Declaration. Putin also met with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, which is quite symbolic. You know, Turkey constantly plays both sides. So Turkey is a member of NATO, but it's also a dialogue partner in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And it was offered an invitation to join BRICS, although Turkey has not officially accepted the invitation. So it's constantly playing both sides to serve its own interests. But in the past few years, especially with the war in Ukraine, Turkey and Russia have grown closer together, and Turkey has become a major trading partner of Russia. Symbolically, Putin also held meetings in China with both the president of Vietnam and also the prime minister of Vietnam. And Russia and Vietnam have long had close relations going back to the Soviet Union, but still today, Russia and Vietnam have very close ties, and they're deepening their partnership. And in fact, Vietnam is now part of BRICS. While the US was waging war on Iran in June, Vietnam quietly announced that it had accepted the offer to become a partner country in BRICS. So this is not just about Russia and China. This is about a larger multipolar project in which more and more countries across the global South are coming together to create alternatives to build a post-Western world in which all countries, the countries of the global South that were colonized by the West, they all have an equal voice. They're not treated as neo-colonies like the US treats countries of Latin America today, violating their sovereignty, threatening war on Venezuela, backing coup attempts. More and more countries are coming together in organizations like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they're saying, we refuse to accept this neo-colonial order dominated by the West, with the United States on top, trying to impose its hegemony on the rest of the world. The global majority is not accepting that. And at the heart of this multipolar project is, of course, China and Russia and that deep partnership. But it's not just about them. And if you want to learn more about these very significant changes that are happening in the world today, make sure that you subscribe to our work here at Geopolitical Economy Report. I am Ben Norton. I'm the editor of Geopolitical Economy Report. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.
At the staggering cost of £25 million, every single person in Britain with a telephone was just shrieked at by the government. A government that has 11% approval rating in the opinion polls. Even Macron's got 13%. The British government has 11%. That means 89% of the British people don't approve of them. But they're spending money like water, and war and the preparations for war are the highest on their agenda. Not the ailing, failing National Health Service, not the ancient decrepitude of our public services and public facilities, our sewers, our water, not on the paralyzed coastal communities in Britain sinking into the sea metaphorically as well as perhaps literally, not on the ancient 300-year-old industrial infrastructure of Britain, no, on war, on handing over money and promising forces we don't have for more and more war. The shrieking that we got was just that, a shriek. It didn't tell us what to do in this emergency it was priming us for. What were we supposed to do? Climb under the stairs? Lay into our stockpile of baked beans and bottled mineral water? What were we supposed to do in this emergency? What's the point in telling us there's an emergency that you are leading us into without any means of protecting our families or defending ourselves? Mind you, this is a government of trash. I told you exactly 6 days ago that Britain's Deputy Prime Minister was a lowlife, and now she's a no-life. They tried to hang onto her to the bitter end, but the evidence just kept mounting that she was a chiseling little cheat who, for private enrichment, for personal wealth, betrayed the policies of the government and the laws passed by the government, passed by her actually. She ignored them, because with this government, it's don't do as I do, it's do as I say. All of it would be worthy of a show unto itself, but there are much more deadly, potentially fatal, existential questions that are now reaching out all across the globe, and the British and the American government are deeply embroiled in all of them. Let's start with the most significant. In 1789, the US government established the Department of War. Who were they making war on in 1789? The Department of War was to make war on the Native American people and to complete the annihilation of the original inhabitants of the United States of America. The settlers came from far away, first from Britain, then from Germany and Norway and Denmark, all over the world they came from in the end, but they weren't Americans, bruv. The Americans had been handily disposed of in blood and thunder by the established Department of War. The Secretary of War in America in 1789 made war on Americans and may very well be getting ready to do so in Chicago this very weekend. The promise to make war on the cities and the vast urban conglomerates in America may be yet another reason to conclude that Donald Trump didn't intend to put America first. He isn't MAGA. He's anything but MAGA. He hates the majority of the people in America, and increasingly they hate him. But the clear and present danger is that this Department of War and this tattooed drunkard, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of State for War, is literally steaming gunboats full speed ahead to the shores of Venezuela. The Venezuelan people have become mobilized. Millions of them are being armed. Militias are being formed. The very existence of Venezuela hangs in the balance. This was all kicked off by a pornographic, obscene clip which Donald Trump unveiled in the Oval Office of the White House itself. It was the summary execution of what he said were drug dealers. I'll come back to that in a minute. And I got to asking, it's a question no one has yet properly answered, how come President Duterte of the Philippines is currently rotting in a jail cell in The Hague, in the Netherlands, for, checks notes, summary execution of drug dealers? That's what he stands accused of. In fact, he's only guilty of the crime of seeking to break the addiction of the people of the Philippines to being told what to do by the United States of America. But Donald Trump did exactly the same. He says he landed American missiles on a small boat of 11 people and claimed they were drug dealers and boasted that he'd summarily executed them. No trial, no apprehension, no facts, no evidence, no drugs, no drug dealers. Every person on board was simply eviscerated. And Trump boasted of it with that idiot, savant look on his face. It turns out that they weren't drug dealers at all. They were fishermen. It wasn't a boat headed for the United States. It was a boat that could only sail 200 miles off the coast of Venezuela, as can be clearly seen by the kind of engine that the boat had. Nobody told Trump, and he's too stupid to know, that to claim that this boat was headed for America with drugs could not possibly be true. It could not go more than 200 miles. And if they were drug dealers, when was it legal to eviscerate suspected drug dealers? When was it legal, when you could have apprehended them, for people to be murdered? For that is what they were, murdered with the typical panache of Donald J. Trump. But that is, of course, only a mere bagatelle compared to what the Secretary of State for War has in mind. He said, nobody said it about him, he said, we are only awaiting orders from President Trump to invade Venezuela. Now, I know quite a bit about Venezuela. I've been there many times. I know the feelings, not just of the people of Venezuela, but all over Latin America, about the Yankees up north. I know that they will fight tooth and nail with any weapons that they can get their hands on against any American invasion of Venezuela. And what are you going to do once you've invaded it? You're going to occupy it? Do you know the size of Venezuela? Do you know that Venezuela is one of the biggest countries in the world? You know about the mountains and the jungles and the urban alleyways of the towns and cities of Venezuela? Are you looking for a new Vietnam? Because that is exactly what you're going to get. Now, I know, President Trump, that you were sadly unable to answer the call of the United States government to fight in Vietnam. In fact, 7 times you got a deferment on medical grounds because you had bone spurs. You could not possibly die face down in a Vietnamese paddy field. So you were very lucky. But I'm here to tell you, you are leading your country into a new Vietnam. And if you do it, I mean, one part of me hopes that you do it. It's only my love of the Venezuelan people and my love of the ordinary people of the United States military who will be sent there, ordered there, that stops me hoping that you will do it, for it will bring about the end of the Monroe Doctrine. It will bring about the end of the idea that you can invade anybody, anytime, any place, anywhere. But it's not the only war that is apparently pending. Today, a swarm of Yemeni drones answered the mass murder of almost the entire government of Yemen by an Israeli airstrike in Sana'a, the Yemen capital. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Information Minister, the Culture Minister, the head of the Armed Forces, minister after minister after minister was eviscerated in an instant by Netanyahu and his American-supplied weapons and aircraft. And so the Yemenis said, we will answer this. You think we don't have anybody else that can become our prime minister, can become our foreign minister? We have many Yemenis ready to pick up their rifles and their microphones and their portfolios. And they waited a few days, and today they answered. They landed a swarm of drones on the settler state, evading all American and Israeli interception attempts, and they bombed the facilities and the terminals of the Israeli airports at Ben Gurion in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. They bombed 2 airports in one day without any reply from Israel's depleted defensive shields. And Israel has said that unusual forms of response will now be delivered by Israel. Unusual forms can sometimes mean weapons of mass destruction. And there's no reason to believe that Israel will not deliver weapons of mass destruction, because it was revealed this week that is precisely what they did in Syria. People laughed, pooh-poohed when I claimed that Israel had launched a nuclear weapon at Syria in the last few months. But this week it was confirmed that depleted uranium from Israeli weaponry has been detected, and a wave of cancers and mutilations and deformities can be expected amongst the Syrian population affected in the months and years to come. So what is it that they are actually going to do with Yemen? Yemen has effectively placed a stranglehold on Israeli traffic passing through the Red Sea. It has already, the only government in the world to do so, intervened to stop a genocide, which is the legal obligation on all governments everywhere. But none of them are living up to their legal requirements except the government of Yemen. The Yemeni people will be bracing themselves for another Israeli response, and soon there will be another Yemeni response. Why does all this matter? Well, right next door to Yemen is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran, which has rebuilt its defenses, which has improved its offensive capability, which now has Russian and Chinese weapons systems in place, is also expecting a new round of warfare with the settler state, led currently by Netanyahu. They very well may take it that attacks of an unusual nature on the people of Yemen next door is a clear and present danger to them. You'll recall that Professor Morandi didn't really have an answer to me, perhaps couldn't give an answer to me on what I believe is a very real and significant question. If you were Iran, why would you wait for Israel to launch its repeatedly promised attack on you when you could preemptively and entirely legally launch your retaliatory self-defense strikes upon them? And I firmly believe that that is what is going to happen. Meanwhile, two people that you might not have expected agreed on the most important question in the world this week. They were Putin, the Kremlin, the government of Russia, and Trump, Rubio, and the government of the United States. What did they agree on? They agreed on this, that Europe is the reason why the Ukraine war shows no signs whatsoever of coming to an end. The European pygmy governments, with their 11% approval ratings, with their 13% approval ratings, with their rapidly vanishing economic, cultural, and historical power, are nonetheless openly preparing for a war with Russia. I told you just the other day, on Wednesday, that Macron had ordered French hospitals to be ready for a mass casualty event in the middle of 2026, which is less than a year from now. Macron expects France to be taking mass casualties in a war with Russia less than a year from now. The British government continues to bleat that it will send 30,000 British soldiers to face the wrath of the battle-hardened nuclear superpower Russia in Ukraine. The fact that we don't have 30,000 soldiers, the fact that they wouldn't last 5 minutes, does not seem to have deterred the British determination, fueled by its ancient hatred with Russia, to go to war for Zelensky in Ukraine. Now, I know of nobody in Britain, and I know a lot of people in Britain, and a lot of people in Britain know me, talk to me everywhere that I go, to the shops, everywhere that I step foot in Britain. I have not yet met anybody, never, who said they wanted to go to war with Russia for Zelensky, and for which side of a line Kupiansk should lie on, when it has lain on 4 different maps in 4 different countries in the last 100 years. Spoiler alert, Kupiansk will in the next hours be on the Russian side of the line. So I'll have to find a new metaphor on that one. I know nobody in Britain that is ready to send their sons or daughters to war with Russia. And I doubt if there's anybody in France who's ready to do so either. I'm of the view that they're going to have to conscript our young people into the armed forces. It's why I was instrumental in forming the No Conscription League, because we simply don't have the wherewithal to even credibly warn or threaten Russia with a war. And Trump is right, like a stopped clock. He's right roughly twice a day, wrong the rest of the time. But he's right when he said that it is the European governments that are the principal blockage to any end to the war in Ukraine. Iran, Yemen, Ukraine, Gaza, China. I spoke about it on Wednesday. And I see that the video's been frozen as a result of a copyright strike from Chinese TV. Are you crazy, you people? Are you mad? We were exalting China on Wednesday, and you banned our video on YouTube. Either you or your computers need looking at. It's all coming up on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
As it feels bad to be an American with a functioning brain right now.
And what most of y'all failing to realize is China is the most advanced country in the world now. Like, I hope y'all know that.
China didn't just catch up to the West, it built a new standard, while America's still stuck in the 20th century. From facial payments to drone deliveries, high-speed rail to smart cities, the future isn't coming. It's already here, and it's not in the US. Let's look at some clips that show exactly how far behind America's fallen.
It's got to feel good to be Chinese right now. Like, they've got to feel exactly as good as it feels bad to be an American with a functioning brain right now. They are like on the exact opposite trajectory as the United States. Like, we've just been on this rapid decline my entire life. And then they've been on this upswing for the entire time as well. Like, if I could have chosen to be born anywhere in the world, it would have been China. Back in the 80s when I was born, it probably wouldn't have been great. But my entire life would have been my country improving and getting better. Whereas as it's been here, my country's just been getting worse and worse. Like, literally, they are winning on everything. Their economy's the best. Their government is the best. They're working for their citizens rather than for corporations like it is in the United States. They have, like, universal home ownership. Everyone has savings. They have retirement at like 58. They've got everything that they need to survive. We don't even have national health care or a living wage here. We have homelessness. In allegedly the richest country in the world, they've eradicated homelessness essentially. And the rest of the world actually likes them. They use the Belt and Road Initiative, like kind soft power, to build relationships overseas where the United States just invades anyone and bullies people economically. I'll take that over this, let me tell you.
This guy gets what most Americans refuse to see. China experienced the most dramatic quality of life improvement in human history. They lifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty in 40 years, while America's poverty rate barely budged. Chinese life expectancy jumped from 66 to 78, while American life expectancy is actually declining. The numbers don't lie. China's home ownership rate is 90% versus America's 65%. Their savings rate is 45%, while America's is 13%. They retire at 58 with pensions, while Americans work until they die. One generation of Chinese people went from bicycles to bullet trains. One generation of Americans went from the American dream to the American decline. And Y says, many Chinese people have grandparents who went hungry as children, parents who worked as factory laborers, and now their own children graduate from university and work in high-tech jobs. Such a transformation is rare in any country, yet it is common in China. My daughter once asked her grandfather what their swimming pool was like when he was young. She couldn't grasp just how vast the gap is across 4 generations. Now, this story perfectly captures what real progress looks like, and it's the opposite of the American experience. 3 generations from starvation to swimming pools, from factory floors to high-tech careers. Meanwhile, American millennials can't afford what their parents had. Gen Z is living with roommates into their 30s. and social mobility has completely stagnated. That little girl asking about her grandfather's swimming pool represents something that many Americans have lost: the expectation that each generation will do better than the last.
I'm tired of hearing this talk about China's this, China's that. I'll never live in China. It's a third world country, whatever. And what most of y'all failing to realize is China's the most advanced country in the world now. Like, I hope y'all know that. China's where it's at. Like, I had a great time my 3 years there. I saved hella bread, lived great, did what I wanted to do. Like, this stuff y'all hearing is BS, bro. Like, a lot of y'all need to get y'all passport and go travel. Stop just listening to people on the internet. Like, go for yourself. Like, the world is globalized now. You know, you're not restricted. You can get your visa. If you have a passport, you can be there within 2 weeks. Like, everything is advanced. They're not playing. Like, you can pay with your face. Imagine you leave your crib without your phone or your wallet. You can pay with your face, and y'all talking about third world country. It seems like a lot of people ignorant but want to talk. Like, I live there. Like, and I'm just talking about the advancement side of things. Like, the lifestyle side of things is crazy. In terms of the pricing, the lifestyle, apartments be like $270 for a 2-bedroom. Like, you telling me that's not lit? Paying less than $1 every time you take the subway, $2, $3, $4 meals. Like, this is what living is. Things that are essential aren't expensive there. And people think that, oh, okay, America, you know, has this, has that, but y'all can't pay for it. Like, most of y'all cannot pay for the things that are available to us in America. Like, what's the point of having all these things when you can't even afford it? Or you struggling to just maintain it? When I lived there, I had more than enough money to do what I want, and I saved. Like, that's the point. I saved. And a lot of y'all just stuck on this American way. I don't get it, bro. I really don't. Like, a lot of y'all need to get y'all passports and leave and go check and see what's out there. I'm telling you.
While America is arguing about contactless payments, China's got 900 million digital wallet users, and many can literally leave their house without a phone or a wallet and still buy groceries. And those living costs he mentioned, China's cost of living can be up to 45% lower than the US, with rent being 60% cheaper on average. So when he's talking about $270 for a 2-bedroom apartment and dollar subway rides, he's just stating facts. And that makes America look expensive and outdated. And here's the thing: China's mobile payment adoption rate absolutely destroys America's. We're talking about a country where street vendors and buskers accept QR codes, while half of America still can't figure out Apple Pay. And this comment says, the difference between China and the US is that when there's a problem, the Chinese government solves it, whereas the US will spend time and effort in finding all the excuses why it can't be solved. The most ironic thing is that there's a lot of Americans who would literally defend these excuses. America's become a nation of excuse makers instead of problem solvers. China built over 4 million 5G base stations, while America spent 4 years arguing about whether TikTok was a national security threat. They eliminated extreme poverty, while America debated whether homelessness is a lifestyle choice. And the most pathetic part, Americans will defend this dysfunction with their dying breath, claiming their freedom to fail is somehow superior to their success.
I told you guys, China is living in the future. Right now, we're going to order some drinks and snacks for the kids, and it's going to get delivered by a drone. Check this out. That's how they do the drone deliveries in China. Pretty cool. It's going to drop down into that box and you have to get it out of there. Now my wife is going to pick up our box from the drone delivery. Beautiful wife. And it's as easy as that. We're living in the future. Yeah.
So convenient. Everywhere, anywhere.
Here comes another one.
There you go. I ordered some drinks.
Yeah, we got the drinks. They came in this little box from the drone. Let's see what's inside.
This
huge drinks.
is a watermelon drink.
The watermelon.
I want it.
For both drones to deliver.
Lemon tea for recycling.
Is it good?
Refreshing.
It is pretty darn good.
Look, it's hanging upside down.
Brad in China.
Drone delivery in China isn't some Silicon Valley pipe dream. It's Tuesday afternoon reality. This video shows exactly why America feels like it's stuck in 2010. China delivered 2.7 million parcels by drone in 2024 alone. Their drone delivery market is valued at $1.4 billion and growing at 42.9% annually. Meanwhile, the US is still debating FAA regulations while Chinese kids are getting watermelon drinks dropped off from the sky. Think about it. This is about infrastructure that actually works. China built over 4 million 5G base stations, while America is still fighting about broadband access. And let's talk about Shenzhen a little bit. You know, in 1980, Shenzhen was a fishing village with a population of around 30,000 people living a subsistence lifestyle. Today, it is a bustling metropolis with a population of over 13.5 million and boasts the fastest growing millionaire population on Earth, with a staggering 140% growth in the last decade. From a humble fishing village to a global tech hub in just 44 years, Shenzhen's transformation is nothing short of a modern miracle. An Asian hero says, "I was in Shenzhen last year having morning coffee on the 21st floor and watched a flying car go by." Flying cars in Shenzhen, potholes in Detroit. That's America's technological gap in one sentence. While this guy is casually watching the future fly past his window, Americans are still debating whether they can afford to fix their 1950s infrastructure. Shenzhen went from a fishing village to a city where flying cars are just part of morning commute in 44 years. Detroit went from the motor city to a symbol of American decline in the same time frame. The contrast isn't just embarrassing, it's a complete indictment of American priorities. One country builds the future while the other can't even maintain the present. When your innovation hub, Silicon Valley, looks like a homeless camp compared to Chinese tier 2 cities, maybe it's time to admit you're not the tech leader anymore.
China is living in the future. So here's everything that blew my mind on my most recent 3-day trip to Chongqing. Starting off with the hotels, the majority of which have smart rooms, where you can control pretty much everything from the click of a button, including this huge projector screen, and they literally have smart toilets everywhere. Now, if you want to order anything to your room, an entire robot will deliver it to you. And the craziest thing is, people just act like it's normal here. But let's talk about the engineering in China, because it is insane. Bear in mind, this city is built on a mountain and has over 30 million people living here. You can be in a main square with shops and restaurants all around you and then realize you're on the 22nd floor. And if that's not enough, the engineers actually built an entire train track into a residential building, which then proceeds to wrap around a mountain. And believe it or not, the train doesn't make any noise whatsoever. Don't even get me started on the cars here in China, the majority of which are electric and you've probably never heard of them. They are super luxurious and have absolutely incredible performance, as you can see on screen. And if you're in two minds, you can get a bike/car. But what blew my mind most was the skyline at nighttime. This city lights up and it feels like you're in some sort of sci-fi movie. The drone shows every Saturday are next level. So if you want a taste of the future, then make sure to pay China a visit, because it will really surprise you.
This video perfectly captures why China makes America look like they're living in the past. Smart toilets everywhere, robot room service, and trains that don't make noise. This isn't science fiction. It's just China in 2025. The engineering he's describing is real. Cities like Chongqing, which went from 2.5 million to over 15 million people in just 25 years, are built on impossible terrain with infrastructure that would make American engineers cry. But here's the kicker. Chongqing was the most heavily bombed city in Asia during World War II, with Japan dropping over 11,500 bombs from 1938 to 1944. This city went from literal rubble to trains running through residential buildings and multi-level highways stacked like a maze. And those electric cars he mentioned, China's not just ahead in EVs, they're lapping America. While America is still debating charging infrastructure, China's got luxury electric vehicles most Americans have never heard of, with performance that puts Tesla to shame. The skyline footage, the drone shows, the seamless integration of technology into daily life. This is what happens when a country actually invests in the future instead of arguing about it. And Iconic says, This could never be implemented in the West. The mindset of the people in the UK, US, and Europe is to smash it up. Then they complain. The mindset in China seems to be to grow as a country, unlike the West. And this cuts to the heart of Western decline. We've become a civilization that celebrates destruction over construction. Americans will vandalize a new bike share program, then complain about the lack of transportation options. They'll vote down infrastructure spending, then whine about crumbling roads. The Chinese mindset is, how do we build this better? While the Western mindset is, how do we tear this down? You see it everywhere, from graffiti-covered subway systems to the way they treat public spaces like garbage dumps. When your culture's default response to innovation is skepticism and sabotage, don't act surprised when your cities look like they're from the 1970s, while China's look like they're from 2070. Growth requires a collective commitment to improvement, and the West has traded that for individualistic destruction. It's time people recognize what's real. One country is building the future, fast and scalable. The other is stuck in gridlock, both on the roads and in the mind. From facial payments to drone deliveries, from bullet trains to smart cities, the infrastructure gap isn't just widening, it's becoming embarrassing. Consider joining our membership. Get a shout out and flex with custom emojis. Drop a comment.
Host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Jha. You can follow the podcast at Steel Silk, letter N. And you can subscribe to support the podcast on patreon.com/silk and steel. Carl, my man, how you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing good, Jamar. Always be happy to be back.
Oh, thank you, man. I was happy to have you. I am super curious on your take on this. You've pointed out on more than one occasion, you said the U.S. doesn't have the balls to go after China. You were very clear about that. You said that months ago. You was like, I don't care what they say. They don't have the balls to do it. And this was even before the rare earth stuff came up. Your point was basically they've lost every military exercise they've gotten into. They're not as suicidal as they seem. And apparently somebody at the Pentagon heard you, Carl, because the new assessment that came out is effectively saying, hey, let's prioritize stuff at home and less about China and Russia. First question, do you even believe this report?
I have no reason to doubt it. I mean, you have the defense secretary. Well, I'm sorry, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who have before he assumed the title of Secretary of War, during a media interview he conducted, he has said as much. He said, in an event of a conflict, China will be able to wipe out all the U.S. carrier groups in Asia Pacific within the first 20 minutes. So he knows this. This is and the parade, the China's Victory Day parade, just drove home to that point. China just showcased whole slew of goodies. They have hypersonic missile, hypersonic glider vehicle, hypersonic cruise missile, all these things that United States don't even possess. And U.S. will have very difficult time to put anti-ballistic defense against what China has. We already saw what happened in the 12-day Israel-Iran war. Israel had the world's most sophisticated, layered anti-missile defense. They had planes scramble to shoot down incoming drones in Jordan and Syria. They have the U.S. THAAD missile system, which costs $1 billion a pop, to fire $12 to $13 million per pop interceptor missiles. And then you have Israel's Iron Dome, David Sling, and you have the U.S. Navy using its Aegis system from Mediterranean to shoot down Iranian missile. All that failed. That could not stop Iranian missiles from landing. And you won't take too many missiles to sink the U.S. aircraft carrier. China has much more missiles and much more advanced missiles than Iran. So Pete Hegseth was correct, in his initial reading of the situation. And I have argued on your show before that despite the rhetoric of pivot to Asia, that's not happening. It's in fact, they're strategically withdrawing. They're pulling back all the way to Guam, to the second island chain. And now we're seeing it actually being formulated in policy. I think they have been watching our show, Jamar. They must be watching our show, and they have come to their senses. And the irony, the man who was tasked to write this plan supposedly was none other than Ulrich Kobe, the Undersecretary of Defense Policy, the man who based his entire career on containing China. The man wrote a book on containing China, and he was a big advocate of wrapping up the war in Ukraine, pull out of West Asia, so we can concentrate all our resources to contain China. And it must be a bitter pill for him to swallow, because he was actually tasked to write up this plan to actually pivot away from China. But this is and this, unfortunately, though, there's a caveat. Unfortunately, this does not bode well for Latin American countries, because the flip side of the drafted plan is they say, okay, we got to focus on our own hemisphere. We got to, reimpose our Monroe Doctrine on Latin America. This is why Trump is sending 4,000 servicemen to cruise around in worship around Venezuela right now. That's what we're trying to do. But again, there's always a caveat. The caveat is that U.S. empire is not run like Russia or China, right? Russia or China have a coherent national policy with long-term planning. You can trust Xi Jinping to execute things like Made in China 2025, which they have largely accomplished. And you can trust Xi Jinping to see through the expansion of Chinese military power. But this is the United States we're talking about. Even if Trump administration draft this plan, it doesn't mean it's going to get executed. U.S. is a collective is a collection of oligarchs competing for power. There's many conflict of interest. Like Trump said, he wanted to wrap up Ukraine war. I mean, it still hasn't happened yet. He said he was going to make it happen within 24 hours of his getting elected. Well, it's what, like 9 months later, and there's a lot of inertia in the U.S. Imperial machine, right? And so even though if they want to execute this so-called withdrawal from Asia to focus on Latin America, it doesn't mean that plan is going to get executed according to the plan. And on top, but even so, even if U.S. do not withdraw resources from Asia at the time, it still means they're losing out to China, because Chinese military is growing year after year after year. We saw that. We saw the result of that on the Chinese military parade on full display. I mean, the whole message of that military parade is China is telling U.S. we can no longer be contained. Good luck, buddy. And then even if the U.S. keep its current military posture in East Asia, Western Pacific at stable level without reducing anything, they're still losing in relative terms against China in the power balance, because China has local superiority. China is not planning to fight United States in the Caribbean, in the North Atlantic, in Africa. Chinese military is designed to win a war around China's neighborhood. And all of Chinese Navy, which numerically already outnumbers the number of ships that U.S. Navy possess, is all concentrated in one area. Western Pacific. That's so China has absolute local superiority in the region. And this is the problem that US faces when you try to fight China. It has to cross this so-called tyranny of distances, 7,000 miles from US mainland to go all the way to Asia to fight China. That's why they had tried to loop in South Korea. They tried to loop in Japan. They tried to loop in Australia. So, to get them to act as a missile sponge, to sponge the first wave of Chinese missiles, so there will be less missiles for U.S. target. But I mean, I don't know how well that plan is executed. They just dragged they just got videotaped dragging South Korean engineers in chains and cuffs. And this is a company that was invited to invest in United States. These South Korean engineers, they didn't come here to take American jobs. They came here to set up the factory so the factory can employ more American workers down the road. And yet, what did the U.S. do? They made a huge spectacle, like the whole humiliation ritual of dragging the South Korean engineers away in chains. I mean, this will be very, very hard to swallow for South Korean public. I mean, and then you are telling them you guys are gonna act as our missile sponge so you can sponge missile attack from China. I don't think that's gonna fly. I mean, this is why they are doing this. I think finally Pentagon is realizing their limitations. So they at least recognize the problem. Whether they can execute it successfully, that's a different matter. But now they have gone through the 5-step grieving process cycle, Jamar. They went through denial, anger, bargaining, depression. Now we're finally coming to acceptance stage. And
it's funny. I can imagine Eldridge Kobe crying on his typewriter as he's typing this document. Like, my entire life has been a waste. My entire life of trying to contain China. I mean, they had been talking about 2027 as the year. And I don't know where they got that year from. I honestly don't. China, as you pointed out, in that military parade, that wasn't even their best military products. China has hypersonic missiles, hypersonic glide bombs. China has missile systems that can hit boats from hundreds, if not thousands of miles away. How do you intend to get to the location, even have the fight before your boats are being taken out? Like, all of this stuff was a fool's errand. And yet they still kept this mindset. And there's one thing I want to piggyback on. Inertia. All of those neocons that have dedicated their lives to going after China, do you think they're going to be swayed by this? Do you think they're going to look at this document and say, hey, you guys make a really good point, rationally? Or is it going to be pure ideology? We're the US. We can do whatever we want. We have no limits. Damn it, we're still going to push this horse or kick this horse.
You have to think why that news was leaked to the press. First of all, there's no investigative journalism in mainstream media right now, right? It's all access journalism. This is all strategic leaks. And you got to ask yourself, why is this plan leaked to the public, right? So I see a couple possibilities. One, there's some member of the administration, maybe Outreach Kobe himself, wasn't happy about the direction where this is going, so they decided to leak it. Or this is leaked by administration themselves to put pressure on countries like Venezuela. Like, just say, hey, we're going to put you on notice. We're going to put all our might on you now, full pressure. I mean, that's a second possibility. Because I as I talk about on other show, the 4,000 military servicemen so far sent to Venezuela, they're not going to make a dent on Venezuela. But what they intend to do is to serve as the visual big stick to intimidate. And probably they're hoping by applying that pressure, maybe inspire some kind of color revolution, instability inside Venezuela itself. I think that's kind of the U.S. modus operandi from now on. They have realized the limitation of their hard power. Now they're relying more on sabotage, color revolution, and this kind of proxy war, rather than going like all out, World War III style civilization ending war against China. So I think that's what's playing out right now. But you're right. There will be a lot of resistance from all across the aisle in Congress, and look at what they're doing right now. Texas just announced a plan to ban CCP from owning farmland in Texas. I mean, this is just fear mongering, because if you actually look at the numbers, China owns like less than 1% of like all the foreign owned land in United States. I mean, it's statistically insignificant. They're just signaling out CCP because they're just using this issue of fear mongering to maybe draw support from their voter base or to get votes. But it has no impact. Well, it does have impact because China is already not buying farm produce from United States. They're switching to buy beef and soybean from Brazil. This is actually why Trump has been going really hard on India, wanted India to open up its farm produce market for American farm produce, because soybeans are getting piled up in United States right now because China are not taking them. So they want India to step in. And this is completely foolhardy, and this remind me again as a Chinese professor Zhang Weiwei, professor of geopolitics in Fudan University. He said Trump understands all the problem in the United States, but all the solution he applies to the problem make things much worse.
That video that I was showing, to back up your point, these are farmers in the United States praying to Jesus for help because their farms are effectively tanking. Now that China has decided to, we're not buying your products anymore, so you're going to have a tariff war. Fair enough. We'll go to Brazil. We'll go to other countries in order to get to allow them to import the stuff that you were using. So instead of having 1.4 billion people to give your products to, so now they're praying to God.
Yeah. I mean,
they're literally praying to God.
Good luck selling beef to India. I mean, good luck exporting beef to India. But the problem is Trump is screwing his voter base right now. All those rural areas, those farm producing regions, they're red states. They're the Republican governors and Republican senators, House of Representatives, Trump. They're collectively screwing their own voter base. What can I say? Trump is my president. Again, I need to reiterate, I'm all for Trump to stay the God Emperor of the United States from now to eternity because he's the best president for the accelerationism of American imperial decline, and I'm here for it.
That's a hell of a shift. Like, I don't know if, we'll see. We'll see if they implement it. I'm very doubtful they're going to implement this. What they seem to be doing, though, is not necessarily pulling out entirely. They're trying to take the U.S. out of harm's way. Meaning it's kind of like, hey, South Korea and the Philippines and Taiwan and Australia, we need you to die for the dignity of the United States. We will give you moral support. And we may get you to buy our weapons. But we do not want to be, as you point out, the sponge of Chinese missiles and Chinese armaments. And same thing in Ukraine and Europe, right? Where in that same document, they're saying how, we're going to stop giving money to these places that are around Ukraine. We're probably going to be pulling out our troops. And so we need you to deal with that for here on out. You can buy our weapons with a 10% markup. just hashtag because. But we need you to deal with that issue from here on out. We will give you advice. But if
this is
why Russia loses it one day. It's on you.
This is exactly what they're doing. They're shifting the burden to their supposedly allies. You know, in Europe, it's the EU, and in Asia, allies, really vassals. But but this is why they keep on yelling at Taiwan. Like if you read newspaper, like every few months they will be yelling at Taiwan. Taiwan is not doing enough for its own defense. Taiwan is not spending enough for its own defense. Why are you not buying more American weapons? Right? I mean, but Taiwanese is like, what do you mean? We want you to die for our freedom. You know, we expect you to bleed and die for us, not the other way around. So I mean, like this is a joke. This is this is not gonna. I trust the Asians. The Asians are a little bit smarter than Europeans, I have to tell you. And
I hope they are.
Well, the Europeans are 100% being captured right now. I mean, their leadership have been totally captured by Washington. So that's a hopeless case. But in Asia, they're you know, the countries in Asia, they're always hedging. They're always hedging, and this is why you know, South Korea and countries like well, I don't know about Australia. Australia is actually the foolhardy one who will always follow United States. But even Japan does not necessarily want to see a war in its neighborhood, because if a war were to take place in East Asia, it's going to be East Asia, Asian city that's going to be wrecked. Right. And the East Asian economy is going to be disrupted. So none of the countries in the region actually want to see a war. And most of the people just want to be left alone and start, you know, do trading and profit. And so this is a area where United States is having less power of persuasion than they had in Europe, you know, because the gravitational pull of the Chinese economy is such that you know, all the neighbors are now being pulled into the orbit of the Chinese economy.
Mm-hmm. Also, like I'm in the middle of writing an article, and I was kind of pointing out this argument that's being made among the various countries of the world, whereas the U.S. has become a naked hegemon. So is Europe, right? I mean, Europe is, mind you, nothing by themselves, but they've lumped in with the United States kind of as, we're going to ride this boat till it sinks. But if you have two arguments that are being made, one, we're the naked hegemon, we're indispensable, we need you to die for us, etc. And the other argument is, we don't want war. We believe in national sovereignty. We're not going to intrude upon your domestic events. When we come into your country, we're going to build bridges, hospitals, roads, etc., etc. And we believe in the dignity of nations and international law. Okay, you tell me, given those two arguments, which one is more favorable to you? Now, you may be scared of the U.S., in which case you may go to daddy on some level because you don't want daddy to come after you. But at 3 a.m. between you and your God, which argument makes more sense? And obviously, it's China's argument. Let's have a world that's not insane. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Like you said, the orbit of China, just the gravity of it in and of itself pulls many of these countries in. And by the way, even Europe, I just saw the trade data with Europe. It was like a 29% jump or something. Insane levels of Europeans buying Chinese goods. So you're absolutely right. I think my biggest fear was that the U.S. recognizes that in an economic contest, it can't compete. It can't compete technologically, can't compete industrially. And my fear was that it was going to go to military as a load balancer of trying to kind of balance out those events. We will see if this document is accepted, because it seems that they're now even coming to the conclusion of even this will be a bad idea. So
Jamar, this is why I disagree with Mearsheimer. I mean, like I have very high respect for Mearsheimer. I think he understands the mentality of U.S. foreign policy perfectly. He knows how U.S. empire works. But if you actually, you know, Mearsheimer's idea kind of mirrors Ulrich Kolbe, right? So like China is our closest near competitor. Forget about Europe. You know, Europe is a declining basket case. Forget about West Asia. Let's pull all our resources to contain China. But the problem, if you look at Mearsheimer's track record, he was right about Ukraine is going to get wrecked. He's right about all this. but U.S. policy never followed his recommendations. He was dead set against of going to screw around Ukraine because that will lead a blowback from Russia. Well, guess what? U.S. went ahead and poked the bear, and he was dead set against U.S. being manipulated by Israeli lobby to drag into the war in Middle East. Well, guess what? U.S. never getting out of that because of Israel, and so that somehow you think that Mearsheimer's policy recommendation is going to be taken seriously this time around. That's not going to happen. Just take Mearsheimer's advice and figure, okay, U.S. government will probably do exactly opposite what he wanted to do. So this, again, comes down to U.S. is kind of this decrepit empire, but with tentacles all around the world, with many competing interests, and these imperial inertia also bog down the machine. They can't really function effectively, like acting with a single brain. Instead, it's acting just like octopus with many tentacles, but each tentacle have their own brains. So this is why Trump cannot wrap up the war in Ukraine. That's why U.S. probably never going to get out of West Asia, and this is why they will never pivot to Asia to contain China. And even the operation they're going against Venezuela, from the current observations, they haven't sent in more military hardware to reinforce those 4,000 servicemen that set out there. So it doesn't look like they're serious about doing a large-scale invasion, because Trump is such a type of person. He wants to go for the low-hanging fruit. He wants to go for the easy victory. He doesn't want to get bogged down in a costly, quagmire situation. So if Venezuela quickly fold, this guy, he will just claim victory, claim he's a great peacemaker. If he doesn't, he can always kick the blame to one of his visors, right? And then be done with it. And that's just the personality of Trump. And so I think as long as Venezuela's domestic situation is stable, I think they will be fine. And they just have to wait out United States.
From your mouth to God's ears. I mean, they have been ramping up in Puerto Rico, using it as a staging base.
What they're really doing in Venezuela, like they say, oh, we're going to put secondary sanction on Venezuelan oil. Well, guess what? Trump just granted a waiver to Chevron to ship 2 tankers full of Venezuelan oil to the United States. So what they're really against is for Venezuela to sell their oil to China, because now China is one of the largest foreign buyer of Venezuelan oil, and China is actually helping Venezuela to upgrade their oil sectors, and because Venezuela is incredibly oil rich. It has the world's largest oil reserve, but the problem is they don't have refining capacity. So Venezuela essentially is exporting crude oil and importing gasoline and refined petrochemical product. So now China is moving in, trying to help upgrade Venezuelan infrastructure so they can get more bang for their buck for their own natural resources. That's what United States want to prevent, because they want Chevron to maintain their monopoly on the Venezuelan oil, and also United States can't really do without the Venezuelan oil, because most of the refinery on southern United States, they are set up to refine the heavy type of crude that Venezuela produces. Whereas in the more recent years, due to fracking, all the oil that's coming from the shale oil, they're light sweet oil. They're not really fit for those old refineries set up to refine heavy crude oil. So what U.S. is doing is exporting the shale oil it gets from fracking, and it's importing Venezuelan oil for refining. This is why Chevron got its waiver. So they still need the Venezuelan oil. They just don't want China to get its hands on the Venezuelan oil. So I expect there will still be competition, but you will move into kind of hybrid warfare stage where they will mix economics pressure, like tariffs and financial sanctions, and together with proxy war, color revolution, to put pressure on what they see as a weaker link among the BRICS countries, member nations. I think that's what's going to happen.
Now, to be fair, Venezuela's not part of BRICS.
It's not, but he wants to, but it's not. Because,
yeah, it's close. Yeah. From my understanding, Lula wasn't a big fan of.
Exactly. they have a very I don't understand why Venezuela and Brazil have this testy relationship, but you're right. It's because of that they're not member of.
Importantly, perhaps. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Following the historic Shanghai Cooperation Summit, one single announcement has already sent powerful ripples through the global energy market and geopolitical landscape. Russia and China have just taken a major step forward with the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline. This is a vast, very ambitious project that could redefine not just energy flows, but the very structure of global power. On the surface, sure, this is just a pipeline, but underneath, it is a symbol of a world in transition. The EU, since it is dependent on energy imports, has everything to lose. This long-discussed project is now backed by a legally binding memorandum between Moscow and Beijing. The Power of Siberia 2 will eventually deliver 50 billion cubic meters of natural gas every year from Russia's Arctic Yamal fields to China. Gas transit will be routed through Mongolia, which is a really important and a strategic move to increase engagement with Mongolia. And in addition to that, being a transit energy corridor yields great financial benefits. Once the gas pipeline is completed, it will become one of the most capital-intensive gas undertakings in modern history. So without a doubt, this is truly huge. But as we understand very well, this isn't just about energy flows. It's about who the world listens to, who writes the rules, and which alliances will reshape the decades ahead. At the heart of this deal is a powerful message. China and Russia are deepening their strategic partnership openly, unapologetically, and increasingly outside the influence of the West. In doing so, they are challenging a world order that is built on decades of Western economic dominance and military alliances. Russia's Gazprom CEO Alexei Miller's announcement came hours after the conclusion of this year's SCO summit, which is in and of itself was a global realignment in real time. By the way, I just published a detailed post about the SCO summit over on my Substack and on my Patreon, including about the Tianjin Declaration. Make sure that you follow me there, and I think you would be really interested to read more about the significance of this event. While key pricing details for the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline are still under negotiations, which is understandable at this point in time, what's significant is this: political negotiations are already done. The project has been given the green light at the highest level from the top leadership of Russia, China, and Mongolia. As Kirill Babayev, a Kremlin advisor on China policy, put it, the big deal is finally underway. Already, the original Power of Siberia pipeline, stretching over 3,000 kilometers from eastern Siberia to China, has reached nearly full capacity. With a 30-year, $400 billion agreement behind it, the pipeline currently delivers 38 billion cubic meters of gas every single year. Now, Gazprom says that they will soon increase it to 44 billion. But the real shift lies in what Power of Siberia 2 represents. It is a pivot away from the West and the firming up of an energy alliance that Western sanctions have failed to derail. They tried, and they clearly failed. It's not just about China getting more gas, getting more energy to make sure that it has enough resources to manufacture. And it's not about that. It's about energy independence from US liquefied natural gas, LNG, and a strategic buffer against future Western leverage. For China, the world's largest energy consumer and manufacturer, this pipeline offers flexibility, it offers options, and most importantly, perhaps, it offers leverage in a world where energy is power. Beijing has already made its position very clear. Despite international sanctions, China continues to receive shipments from Russia's Arctic LNG 2 project. It has ignored Western pressure, and in doing so, it has effectively declared its willingness to continue forging its own path. Sanctions or not. So in other words, China is a sovereign state, not a puppet. Western sanctions, both primary and secondary sanctions, attempted to cripple Russia's economy. But if we look at the numbers, we will see that the trade between Russia and China surged to $240 billion in 2023. And it continues to increase in a variety of areas: energy, technology, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and so on. China is now Russia's largest trading partner, top buyer of crude oil and pipeline gas, second largest buyer of coal, and third largest purchaser of Russian LNG. And while it does appear that the interdependence of these two countries increased over the past several years, it appears to serve their agenda very well at this point in time. I would say that the behind the numbers is a powerful political signal. It's the economic and energy bonds between Moscow and Beijing that are stronger than ever. And now they're becoming institutionalized. During Vladimir Putin's visit to China, 22 agreements were signed. These include a strategic cooperation pact between Gazprom, Russia's energy giant, and China National Petroleum Corporation. Details weren't disclosed at this point in time, and maybe they don't need to be. The symbolism is quite clear. The deepening energy alliance also arrives at a time when Russia is redefining its export strategy. After losing its dominant position in the European gas market due to EU and US sanctions, the Kremlin has pivoted east and certainly found a partner who is ready to engage. Orientation towards the east has definitely worked in Russia's favor, and it allowed to advance non-economic initiatives too, such as security initiatives and humanitarian initiatives, including cultural exchanges, which is typically seen as the foundation for broader ties between nations. For Putin and Xi, this partnership is also personal and I would say ideological. Both leaders reject the West's historical dominance because it systematically seeks to cripple them, to cripple their economies, to destroy their countries, not cooperate with them. Both have called for a new multipolar world order, one not dictated by Washington or Brussels, and they've also expressed shared disdain for what they call Cold War mentalities and foreign meddling in domestic affairs. The US is still struggling with the idea that Russia is not the USSR, and that seems to be backfiring now. With that being said, Power of Siberia 2 is not just a pipeline, it is a statement. It says the East is rising, the West no longer holds a monopoly on global leadership, nor on the flow of energy that fuels economies. It's also worth noting that while this deal strengthens energy ties, China isn't putting all eggs in one basket. Beijing continues to invest heavily in renewable energy, in nuclear power, and in diversified LNG sources. That's what makes this partnership so strategic and interesting. It's not about dependence, it's about options. For the West, this is a wake-up call. Sanctions were supposed to isolate Russia, but instead, they have accelerated a long-term trend, the emergence of an alternative economic and energy axis centered around China and Russia. It's Washington's worst nightmare, no doubt. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think.
Cultfig, follow me.